Meet Hans, the main character of our events, and now we will see how he dies in the future. We understand that the main character is surrounded by a large bunch of zombies and is at a dead end. Now we see that apparently Hans has been bitten by a zombie and is bleeding. The main character cannot get up and understands that apparently this is the end. We see a zombie, who was previously a soldier, sneaking up on him. The main character remembers how it all began, and how the world came to the point where now there are practically only zombies on the planet. Hans thinks that because of the greed and malice of humanity, it was unable to resist the emerging epidemic. After the zombie apocalypse, humanity split into gangs and began to destroy itself. In this chaos, our main character Hans lived for about 3 years following his own rules. We see that the main character is left alone against a crowd of thousands of zombies. A horrific crowd of zombies has attacked Hans, and now it will be the end for him. Judging by the face of the main character, we understand that he is a fearless and self-confident guy who looks danger in the face. He fights against zombies to the end even though he knows he has very little time left. We see a crowd of zombies catch up with Hans and eat him. A moment later, Hans wakes up in his own bed and realizes that he has gone back in time 6 months before the zombie apocalypse, and now has time to prepare. We see a young, beautiful girl welcoming Hans into the apartment she is going to sell him. A young girl talks about the delights of this super expensive apartment and how it has many rooms and necessary equipment. Hans buys this apartment on credit. The hero understands and knows the future, namely that in 6 months the apocalypse will come, and therefore he can take as many loans as he can and spend all the money he has. The main character does not stop there and takes out more loans from various banks, as he understands that these loans will not have to be repaid in the future. We see that Hans, knowing the future and that the zombie apocalypse is coming soon, begins to train hard. Hans realizes that there are 6 months left until the zombie apocalypse, and he doesn't have much time to prepare. He knows that in just a few months the whole world will be plunged into the most brutal chaos. In addition to training, Hans is developing a plan to prepare for the future apocalypse. He goes to the store and buys all the necessary products so that he has a large supply. After buying groceries, Hans sits down at a cafe and begins to eat lunch, but he runs into his work colleagues. We see that Hans did not expect to see them here and is very surprised by this. We are shown Hans's co-workers, including his evil boss. We are shown the face of an angry boss who is unhappy that Hans has stopped going to work. Here we see that Hans remembers the future, and he remembers that the evil boss in the future became a coward and a weakling. Hans's evil boss tells him that he should go to work immediately, or he will take action and punish him. Hans gets up and is about to leave, because there is no point in wasting his time talking to them. Suddenly Hans's boss grabs him by the clothes and says that he is not going anywhere. Hans turns around and tells the boss to remove his hand or he will kill him. We see the boss's surprised face as he had no idea he could get such an answer. Next, we are shown the events that take place against this backdrop, namely a zombie devouring some girl. Hans notices this and immediately decides to do something. We see Hans take his sword out of his bag a second later. Hans's boss thinks that our hero has taken out his sword to kill him and screams in horror. However, we see that Hans ran towards the zombies. The rest of Hans's colleagues don't understand what's going on. We are shown how Hans confidently deals with the first zombie. He cuts it in two with his razor-sharp sword. We see that not a single muscle on our hero's face twitched, as he had done this thousands of times in the future. Hans notices that there is a whole crowd of zombies ahead, but in his opinion, the apocalypse was supposed to start in 3 months, and he does not understand why it is happening so early. We see that there are already a lot of zombies on the street and they are devouring people. People who were not prepared for this are terrified and fearful and don't know what to do. Hans wonders what changed since the apocalypse started earlier. Further on an advertising banner on the street, the news announces a general alarm about a zombie epidemic. Hans understands that now he needs to act according to his plan and heads to his shelter, but someone's hand pulls him back. With a sharp movement of his hand, which he has honed thousands of times, he knocks down the one who tried to pull him back. He points his sword and realizes it's just a girl. The girl in question shouts that her name is Chung-Mi and that she is his colleague at work. Hans says he simply didn't recognize her, although he understands that having lived 3 years in the future, he simply forgot his colleagues. Chung-Mi asks Hans to help her get home. Hans looks at her and remembers her from work, namely that she is a smart and sweet girl, but Hans refuses her. To this, Chung-Mi begs him to help her. Hans agrees, but warns that he will not help if she causes trouble along the way. Hans gives the girl a small knife for self-defense and tells her the best way to kill zombies. We see Hans remaining calm and warming up before taking out the next wave of zombies. They show us up close and we see how terrible they are. Hans takes his sharp sword and prepares to use it in battle. Hans shows that the best way to kill a zombie is to hit it in the head, namely the neck, back of the head, or temple, demonstrating this on a real zombie. Then Hans starts killing zombies. Suddenly a zombie appears behind the girl and knocks her to the ground. Chung-Mi starts screaming and calling for help. Hans turns around and sees the girl being bitten by a zombie. However, after this, our hero turns back, as he warned her that he would not help if she got into trouble. The girl is terrified and realizes that no one will come to her aid. She begins to remember what Hans advised her, namely how to protect herself. Next, Chung-Mi strikes the zombie in the temple. We see that she overcomes him and kills him. With difficulty, the girl rises to her knees and looks forward. She sees Hans fearlessly cutting down zombies in all directions. We are shown that the young guy is very strong, agile, and calculating. The girl looks at all this and understands that if she wants to survive in this chaos, then she should be close to Hans. We are shown that Hans is finishing up dealing with all the zombies around him. Next we see that these two are talking to each other. Hans asks if that zombie bit her and asks to show her the bite site. The girl understands that he saved her life, and she must fulfill Hans's request. We see that the girl begins to take off her clothes. We are shown that Chiang Mai has almost stripped off everything she had. However, our hero suddenly gets up and approaches her. With a sharp movement of his hand, he tears apart the bite site. He investigates how the zombies were bitten. Hans says that the zombie was unable to bite through the young girl's skin, and therefore did not infect her. The girl thanks Hans for his help and says that she wants to return to her family. Next, Chong Mi asks Hans if he has a family. Hans thinks mysteriously and begins to remember. He remembers walking with his mother as a child. He remembers how good it was to hold her hand and be close. However, Hans replies that he has no family. Hans says that from now on he will go alone and that the girl needs to move on. Chong Mi asks Hans to walk her a few more kilometers, but he refuses her. Finally, he gives her advice to avoid large human camps and not to gather in groups of more than 20 people, so as not to cause a wave of zombies. Hans explains that a zombie wave is a phenomenon in which the noise of human camps with more than 20 people around them causes an army of thousands of zombies to gather. He says that if Chong Mi wants to survive, she needs to be in a small group of people, half of whom should be trained in fighting. Finally, Hans advises the girl to take care of herself. We see our main character come home covered in blood. We understand that his apartment is fully prepared for the apocalypse, since during this time Hans has collected everything he needs. The apartment has food, water, and necessary supplies. Hans gets out of the shower and begins to rest and think about how he still has time to save the world from the future apocalypse. He especially thinks about a dangerous gang of people that will form in the future and will be called the Sole Survivors Alliance. In the next scene, we are shown a hypermarket with food products and furniture. We see a crowd of zombies eating some person. His company members are watching this, but they are cowards and can do nothing about it. The leader of the group of people, Kang Kong, shouts that they need to run, otherwise they will all die like this guy. A group of young people quickly run across the store. A moment later, we are shown that one of the girls has been grabbed by zombies and they are starting to eat her. Another zombie is approaching a crowd of people, and right now we need to take action to protect people. The group's leader, Kang Kong, begins to clear the way for his friends to pass on. On the way, they meet a couple more zombies who are going to attack this group of people. The company understands that now it is either fight or flight. But then everyone saw what their leader had come up with. We realize that Kang Kong has climbed onto the shelves of food and is giving everyone his hand so that they can climb up. We see Kong Kong pick up all his friends one by one, and he is the last one left. Suddenly, one zombie grabs Kong Kong's brother, whose name is Kang Hyuk, by the leg. The leader of the group takes out a kitchen knife, which he intends to use to help his brother. With a sharp movement of his hand, he cuts off the zombie's hand and frees his brother. Now the heroes are thinking about what to do next, because zombies have filled the store. We see that zombies come to the noise and their numbers increase. A young girl named Sari suggests coming up with some kind of escape plan from this situation. The group's leader, Kang Kong, says that he will now sacrifice himself and distract the zombie horde while the others escape. Kang Kong's brother says he won't support this idea and believes that everyone can get out alive. He stands up and starts holding his brother so that he doesn't sacrifice himself for the good of the others. At this moment, a zombie that was taller and larger than the others grabs Kang Hyuk's leg and takes him into the crowd of zombies. We see that his brother wants to save him, but the people around him do not allow him to do this because they believe that he can no longer be helped. Suddenly, an arrow flies into the head of that big zombie and Kang Hyuk survives. We are shown Hans standing confidently on a food shelf, holding a crossbow in his hands. Kang Hyuk cries because he is almost saved. However, we are shown that the test is not over as the crowd of zombies continues to surround Kang Hyuk. He tries to escape from them and crawls between the legs of one zombie. Another one suddenly appears on his way and is about to bite him. A black sharp sword, cutting through the air, is already flying towards the neck of this zombie, and we understand perfectly well who it belongs to. 4 zombies get a well-aimed arrow to the head from a crossbow in 2 seconds. Like a wild falcon with divine vision, Hans shoots all the infected. Kang Hyuk looks at Hans and thinks that an angel himself came down from heaven and saved his life. An incredibly beautiful shot of Hans jumping into a crowd of zombies and swinging his razor-sharp sword. Like paper houses, the infected ones fall one by one to the floor from Hans's blows. In the wild dance of a hot battle, Hans feels at home, because in the future, he has been exterminating these creatures for more than 3 years, and is not afraid of anything. Like a dancer, Hans approaches each zombie and pronounces a death sentence on it. When Hans was almost finished, it seemed like a light haze was coming out of his body, as if he was a killing machine for the infected. Hans tells a group of people to follow him if they want to survive this situation. All the people who watched Hans exterminate the crowd of zombies thought in their heads that this man could actually save them. Hans tells them to go down and run after him, as he knows the way out. A crowd of young people descend and begin to help Hans hunt zombies. The group leader is attacked from behind by an infected woman. At that moment, a metal tin can flies at her head. We see that friends in this company protect each other. Hans takes the entire group of young people to a safe place he knows inside the store. Hans sits down in a comfortable soft chair, catches his breath from the heated battle, and tells Kang Hyuk to take off his clothes. The guy is surprised and does not understand why he should do this. Suddenly, Hans remembers the events from the future, and realizes that in the future, he met this group of people, including Kang Khan, who sacrificed himself for him. He remembers that in the future, unfortunately for him, everything turned out to be a tragic death. Hans remembers Kang's actions and realizes that he is a good person and can be trusted. Next, Kang introduces himself and begins to get to know Hans, because he does not know that in the future they were already friends. Hans also greets him and begins to remember the future events that happened to Kang's brother. Specifically, he remembers that in the future, Kang's brother died when a large zombie stole him from a store shelf. In the future, everyone else had to flee after Kang's brother died. However, of all of them, only Kang himself survived. While the group of people were discussing how they had just survived, Hans also began to reason. He realizes that he has just saved everyone, and in doing so, he has changed the future, meaning he will no longer be able to predict future events involving this group of people. Hans stands up and asks how much food the group has left. Kang starts to get worried and asks if Hans wants to rob them. To this, Hans replies that he is alone and has already guessed that they have food. Kang begins to ask how Hans was able to survive alone, since the zombie apocalypse has been going on for over 3 months by this time. All these questions are also very interesting to Kang's group, as they are a little afraid of Hans after what they saw. Hans replies that he had food at home all this time, since he is a thrifty person, and besides, he can hunt zombies and follows his own rules. Kang says they have about 40 people left in the camp and they need food to survive. Suddenly, Hans replies that he knows that there is a warehouse with food and water in this store, but the paths to it are blocked. These products are located several floors below, and everyone must work together to get them. Kang realizes that it is impossible to transport food through the zombie horde and asks how they will do it. To this, Hans replies that they will kill every zombie that gets in their way. Kang panics at what he hears, as they have been barely fighting the zombies this entire time, but have been trying to run away from them. Hans says that he has a plan and people need to follow it in order to survive. A group of people are hesitant, but they accept Hans's offer. They go down the stairs straight to the group's camp. Kang opens the doors and shows Hans where all the other people live. The camp is a floor with furniture and other household items. Hansa is greeted by another camp member named Zhang Huan. He tells Hans that they blocked all the doors that lead into this hall except one, so that they could leave, which is why they are still alive. Hans speaks to the rest of the camp and says that in order to survive, they need to work together and invites them to go with him to get food. However, almost all the people from this camp turn out to be cowards and reject Hans's offer. A girl named Sari approaches Hans and says that people do not trust him because bad thieves have come here before and robbed them. Hans is surprised and wonders if it was the Soul Survivors gang. He remembers that this gang of cruel thieves and murderers who ruled the streets in the future. However, Sari says that it wasn't them, and that these people also took 6 girls, including her sister. Hans says he doesn't yet understand how he can help in this situation. At this, Sari begins to take off her clothes. We see that the girl has a very good figure and she continues to undress. Hans yells at her, asking her why she is doing this. Sari replies that she wanted to satisfy Hans that he helped her. Hans says that he will find her sister as soon as he has the chance, as he hates thieves and is ready to kill them. The girl is surprised and does not understand why he needs this, and why he refused the offer to satisfy him. Hans replies that his mission is to save this world of bastards and freaks like those people. Next, we see a dialogue between Hans and Kang, who discuss how to motivate the camp to start fighting against the zombies. Hans realizes that Kang doesn't know what to do yet and decides to do everything himself. Hans begins to tell Kang his plan, which is not yet revealed to us. In the next scene, Kang is speaking in front of the people and is about to give Hans a chance to speak. However, turning around, he sees that he is not there and has gone somewhere. Suddenly, the door to the camp is opened by Hans's foot, who is holding an infected monster by the hair. He throws it into the hall and everyone sees it. The crowd of people starts screaming in fear and horror, as they are all cowards. But Hans offers them to practice hunting monsters. The first person to volunteer is a beautiful girl, Sari. Hans likes this and calls her over to him. He shows her a pair of specially made bracers to protect against zombie bites and asks her to put them on. Sari wears special bracers and looks rather ridiculous in them, and she also wears heels like a real beauty. Hans shows exactly how to kill zombies. He says that you always have to be prepared, and that zombies are quite slow and clumsy. Hans shows exactly how to finish off the infected, and that there is no need to be afraid or hesitant when doing so. They show us that they have dealt with one infected person. It was Sari who managed to finish off the zombies under Hans's supervision. We see that the zombie hunting training continues. This time, Hans has to demonstrate his techniques on a former police officer. Luckily, this zombie still had a gun from when he was human. Minso also trains to defend himself by hunting zombies that Hans brings. She is shocked by how much she had to change herself to become stronger. We see that the training is taking place in public, and only 8 people out of the entire crowd are ready to fight. Hans's plan was for one group to block the entrance doors on the first floor, while the second group on the left took the food supplies. We see that our heroes are full of determination and confidence as they go about fulfilling this mission. Also accompanying them are the rest of the camp members who agreed to help. In the next stage, we see how brave young people begin to fight against the infected. Suddenly, Sari falls to the floor and loses her composure. At that moment, a terrible and scary zombie attacks her. Hans yells at her to pull herself together and start defending herself. He tells her to take out her knife and attack the zombies. Hans then realizes that if he doesn't do something now, Sari will die. He jumps over the crowd of people and starts attacking the zombies. With a kick of his right leg, he knocks all the brains out of this monster. Then, with a somersault and extraordinary agility gained from years of training, Hans deals with another zombie. And now we see that, as if in a shooting gallery, Hans shoots a crowd of zombies with precise shots to the head. Sari was very impressed by Hans's latest demonstration of his fighting abilities, and even felt a little embarrassed. Then a group of people with Hans went to catch up with the remaining people. We see that the second group also completed their task and cleared the territory of zombies. However, Kang Kong stands up and says that he needs to admit something. Kang Kong removes the glove from his right hand, and we see that it is covered in blood. Hans is surprised by this, since the blood on his right hand is most likely from a bite. Kang says that he was indeed bitten by a zombie when they were killing more infected. Hans puts a gag in Kong's mouth, and that can only mean one thing. In the next scene, we see Hans raising his razor-sharp sword over Kang's hand. Hans understands that cutting off his hand is the only way out of this difficult situation. Hans cuts off Kang's arm and it is immediately bandaged. Zhong Huan carries Kang on his shoulders as he passes out. Another flock of zombies approaches the group of young people. Everyone decides to run back to safety. We see that they have returned to the camp and are knocking on the door. Upon returning to camp, the people around are surprised to see Kanga being carried in their arms. Hans then goes on to tell what happened. Some people start to criticize Hans for cutting off this guy's hand. Hans himself begins to worry about what he has done, but he understands that he had no other choice. Kang is placed in the infirmary and cared for until he regains consciousness. A few hours later, Hans announces that they have obtained food, and that they will now be in a room behind a locked door, and he will have the keys. All of Hans's supporters begin to carry food items inside this room. However, not everyone likes this state of affairs, and many are beginning to express disagreement. Hans explains that food will now be given out strictly per person in order to prevent hunger strikes, and that those who risk their lives must eat better. The crowd of cowards doesn't like this even more, since they will now get less food. Suddenly, a diaper flies at Hans. Some hysterical mother with a child is yelling at him. Hans bends down and looks at what was thrown at him. He sees that there was baby shit in that diaper. Hans thinks and realizes that these people are ungrateful cowards. Next, a crowd of people runs towards Hans, who do not agree with the fact that he has become the leader of this camp, and that he now sets his own rules. At this point, Hans remembers how he offered these people to go fight with him, but they were all afraid. After this, we see Hans take his pistol out of his holster. In the next scene, we see a gunshot hole in the floor and a group of people who are afraid of Hans. He says that he is the boss here and now everyone will obey his orders. Hans is confident in himself, because he has already helped many of these people, and he is the only hope for survival of this camp. All the people silently accept what he says, since they can do nothing to counter his words. Next, the food products are clearly distributed among the shelves. We see that they are starting to give them out to everyone according to portions. People are very hungry and want to eat, so they are very happy with new products. After this, people start coming to the group of Hans's supporters and asking how they can help the camp so that they can also get more food. Hans realizes that his plan to unite people is working. Hans then begins to consider who he can leave as leader in his absence. He recalls that he wanted to make Kang the leader of the camp. He then thinks that the rest of the squad are either too naive or too old. Sari is a brave girl, but she is also not yet ready to become the leader of the squad. Hans doesn't yet understand who he can make his deputy. After thinking about Sari, she appears in his head and seems to seduce him. A few hours later, Hans decides to give her a task, namely to write a notice that they will put up on the windows of their store in case any survivors pass by. Sari is writing this ad. Hans says that he is tired and wants to rest. We see that our hero doesn't have a bed, so he sleeps on the floor. Suddenly, Sari knocks on his door and says that there is a problem in the camp. Namely, she says that the toilets have run out of water. Hans realizes that with so many people in the camp, this is a really big problem. Hans gathers the people and announces that the water has run out. People are nervous and don't know what to do next. Hans comes up with a plan to clear the roof of zombies and get the cisterns and pump running to supply water. In the next scene, we see that our heroes have started to carry out the plan and are already clearing the area of zombies. Hans walks through the cleared area of the store and sees that the last zombie remains there. With a precise shot from a crossbow, he finishes off the last one. Everyone is happy that everything is going well so far. Evening comes and Hans's squad begins to carry out the second part of the plan. He says he'll check out the parking lot first. Through the crack in the door, he sees a dangerous situation. Namely, in the parking lot leading to the pumps, there is a large number of zombies that even their group cannot cope with. Hans tells everyone that it will be very difficult to cope. Then Hans comes up with a plan and asks if there are any mechanics among the people. To this, the young guy says that before the apocalypse, he worked as a car mechanic for 4 years. Hans is glad to hear this and suggests a very interesting plan. We see that Hans's plan is making people nervous. In the next scene, part of Hans's squad is running from a horde of zombies in a parking lot. It turns out that their task is to distract the zombies, so that Hans and the auto mechanic can find cars and block the zombies' path with them. Hans is already starting to look for a car to drive, but at first he is unsuccessful. He still manages to find one with the ignition keys in the passenger compartment. Hans tells the mechanic to prepare the car. However, he tells him that he needs to find a suitable battery. Then the two of them go looking for the battery, and they see the car they need and want to open it. There is someone knocking from inside this car. Hans opens the doors and sees something horrifying. It turns out that there is a little zombie girl sitting inside the salon. Hans thinks for a second but does what he must. A moment later, our heroes are running across the parking lot with the discovered battery. A crowd of zombies is chasing them and trouble could happen. Hans protects the mechanic while he installs the battery. Hans understands that now there will be a battle in which he must give his best. We are transported behind the zombies, and from here we can clearly see how Hans begins to exterminate this crowd. Hans is getting very tired and his strength is almost gone, and the crowd of zombies is getting bigger. Hans gives his last strength to this fight. Now Hans is shouting at the mechanic to speed up, otherwise they will both die. It looks like everything could end very tragically for our heroes now, because the infected have already surrounded them. The mechanic shouts that he has finished fixing the car and they can go. Our heroes suddenly jump into the car, fighting off a crowd of zombies. Next in the car, Hans and the auto mechanic destroy the rest of the zombie crowd much faster. Our main character drives very well and wants to get there in time for the others. We see that the second part of the group has also started the truck by this time. The truck must be positioned parallel to the exit, and Hans must cover the remaining gap with his car. This is what the passage looks like, which our heroes have almost closed. The mechanic who is sitting in the car with Hans shouts that they are going to crash. However, Hans keeps his cool and drives backwards. The trip ends with a sharp blow and the path for the zombies is blocked. Now we understand what exactly Hans's plan was. The third group of people, who had been distracting the main part of the zombies all this time, also survived by climbing onto the truck. They begin to finish off the last of the infected. Hans sees that they have one last effort left to make and joins them, cutting down the crowd of zombies from behind. So this battle is over and our heroes lie without strength. Hans says to bring the rest of the camp to the parking lot to help clean up the area. We see that the rest of the camp members have arrived at the parking lot. Hans shows them that they need to put all the zombie corpses in order to be able to stay here. Not everyone can stand this picture and the girl starts to feel sick. Then people begin to clean up the area and remove the corpses. Hans discovers another warehouse with food products that apparently did not have time to be delivered to the store before the apocalypse. Everyone around was very happy about this. Next, people from the camp begin to deliver food to the appropriate room. Even beer is found in food products. And here is a young girl running towards the fresh air, because the street is visible from the parking lot. We understand that because this girl has been living in a camp for 3 months, she hasn't even seen the sky. While on the roof of the store, Hans notices a hospital and thinks that he needs to get there and get medicine for Kang. After this, people begin to burn the corpses of the zombies they killed. Then everyone returns to camp and celebrates the victory. Suddenly an old man comes up to Hans and says that there is bad news. Namely, the old man said that Kang died. This leaves our heroes in complete shock. Hans goes to Kang's room and makes sure. In reality, Kang died from blood loss. Everyone begins to mourn the death of a good and worthy man from the camp. Kang's brother, who cannot cope with the loss of a loved one, feels especially bad. Kang's brother takes his body and takes it away, as he wants to bury it in the cemetery with his parents. Luckily for him, there are no zombies on this side, and he calmly takes his brother to the cemetery. A few hours later, inside the camp, we see a young girl handing Hans some soup she has just prepared. Hans tries it and really likes it. The girl is embarrassed and says that before the apocalypse, she was a cook. In the next scene, we see someone's hand reaching for food in a warehouse. Hans notices this and stops the theft. The woman turns around abruptly and groceries fall out of her clothes. She is afraid of Hans and says that she took the food for her child. Hans forgives her and says that they will get more food so that there is enough for everyone. The woman burst into tears from the kindness of our hero, and after that Hans leaves. In the next scene, we see that the old man is called an emergency meeting. He announces that there were attempts to forcibly take possession of 2 women in the camp. Everyone is shocked by what they hear. The old man says that the evil male members of the camp wanted to take Sari and another girl by force. According to the old man, Sari fought back and stabbed one of them with a knife. Everyone starts discussing how they will deal with these men and suggests different options. Hans suddenly rises from the table and says that in this camp he will make the rules and there will be no equality. Hans states that the men who attacked Sari must be killed, as the knife is contaminated with zombie blood and they will turn into zombies anyway, and they are bad people. They start arguing with Hans and he agrees to a compromise and decides to kick the bad men out of the camp. This decision seems logical in order to reduce the number of people in the camp. Hans once again reminds everyone about such a thing as a zombie wave. He says that the zombie wave may include mutated monsters that seek out large groups of people. Next, we see that Jung Hwan gives the keys to the room where the men who attacked the women are locked up. Hans says they'll just throw these guys out on the street. Hans opens the door with a key but hears some strange sound behind the door. Upon opening the door, Hans and Jong are attacked by 3 zombies. Hans hits the first zombie with a sharp punch to the face. We see that the blow was so strong that Hans pushed away all 3 with one blow. After this, our characters deal with the transformed men. Apparently, they were transformed by cutting their hands with an infected knife. Hans gives the weapon to Jong and says that he will be his deputy. The protagonist says that he sees a real leader in Jong, ready to defend this camp. After this, Hans announces that he is leaving the camp for a few days to scout out the situation around him. In the evening, Hans begins to descend along the rooftops towards his house. We see that Hans has equipped his house as a real fortress, impregnable to zombies. He watches as the ditch he dug earlier works perfectly. Hans takes a shower and thinks that tomorrow he will try to find the bandits who took Sari's sister. In the morning, he is already running through the streets of the city and looking for the supposed place where the bandits might be hiding. And now Hans enters the building that Sari was talking about and sees that there really are bandits there. He attacks one of the bandits from behind and quietly eliminates him. Hans then scouts out the situation and sees that there are still bandits on the premises of the building, and he doesn't know how many there might be. Hans sees a hole in the wall in the form of a ventilation hole. He climbs inside and is going to get as much information as possible and of course find Sari's sister. Suddenly he notices the gang leader's office downstairs. His name is Boss and he acts very selfish and arrogant. He interrogates some poor guy and punches him in the stomach. This makes the guy fall to the floor and not get up. The boss tells me to bring him a new girl so that he can play with her and have fun. However, one of his subordinates replies that the girls are already having a bad time and the boss hits him in the face. After this, the boss says that everyone must obey his orders, otherwise he will kill everyone. Next, the boss says that we need to visit the camp at the store to pick up food and medicine from them again. Hans realizes that boss was talking about his camp and decides that this gang must be eliminated. Suddenly, a silhouette of a man appears behind Hans. Hans senses this and turns sharply to repel the enemy's attack. However, this man hits him in the face with a new one and a fight breaks out between them. Our hero has trained for many years, so he is not inferior in fighting skills to his opponent. Hans lands his enemy on the floor and begins to beat him with his fists, but he defends himself. The unknown person then kicks Hans in the chest and pushes him back. Hans uses a scorpion kick and with a deft kick knocks his opponent off balance. After this, Hans takes out his pistol with a silencer and asks the man who he is. The stranger takes off his mask and says that he does not wish harm to Hans. The stranger introduced himself as a man nicknamed the Cleaner and said that they were on the same side as him. However, Hans does not believe him and is about to shoot, but at that moment the Cleaner jumps down. Hans looks down and sees that the janitor has escaped, but he has been spotted by the gang members. The villains quickly run after Hans because they see him as a threat. A moment later, Hans finds himself surrounded by armed opponents. Hans decides to surrender because he realizes that he doesn't have enough bullets for everyone. In the next scene, Hans and the janitor are kneeling before the boss. We understand that the boss and the janitor were previously acquainted because he punches him in the face. The boss says he told the janitor not to come into the building again. To this, the Cleaner replies that the boss never gave him something and that he came specifically for it. The boss hits the janitor again because he is unhappy that the janitor disobeyed the order not to appear here. The boss then orders Hans to be killed as he has no use for him. The boss's subordinates show him the pistol with a silencer that they took from Hans. The boss asks our hero where he got the firearm and why he didn't use it against his gang. Hans confidently replies that if he had more bullets, he would have shot all of his subordinates. The boss laughs hysterically at Hans's confident words. The boss says that they also have firearms and even machine guns, so some cute guy is no problem for them. The boss likes Hans's self-confident tone and invites him to join the gang. To this, Hans replies that if he were to become a member of the gang, it would only be as the boss's deputy. The gang leader laughs hysterically again and starts asking where the place is from where he got the gun. The boss says this is Hans's last chance to survive. Our hero with red hair says that he took the gun 4 days ago from a gun shop, which is a 3-hour walk from here, and that there are other weapons there. Hans convinces them that his words are true, and that they can find machine guns and pistols for themselves, after which the bandits go to the store for weapons, and Hans and the Cleaner are left with one guard. The guard leaves Hans and the Cleaner alone because he wants to go to the toilet. At this point, Hans begins to cut the rope with which he was tied. The Cleaner looks at this and does not understand who this Hans is and why he acts so confidently. We see that Hans's boot has a special blade. Hans frees himself from the rope and is about to kill the guard with a special wire. Hans climbs onto the ceiling and waits for the guard to return. Hans jumps from the ceiling onto the guard, knocking him over and strangling him. The security guard couldn't do anything because he wasn't prepared for such a situation. Hans takes the guard's radio. In the next scene, we see a gang of bad guys who came to the gun shop indicated by Hans. The boss realizes that Hans has deceived him, and there have been no weapons here for a long time. The boss calls the guard Hans and the Cleaner on the radio and asks if everything is okay with them, and the voice from the radio station replies that everything is fine with them. The gang returns to their building to find that Hans and the janitor have escaped. Suddenly, boss realizes that Hans might have come to their gang to free the hostages. The boss calls the hostage guard on the radio and asks how they are doing. The hostage guard is a big guy named Steve who has a machine gun. Steve replies that the hostages are under control, At this moment, a voice calls boss on the radio and says that Hans is on the roof of the building. All the gang members go upstairs to find our hero. Next, the bandits find an abandoned radio station. One of the bandits picks her up and says that he will find the bastard Hans and kill him. At that moment, some object hits the back of his head, killing the bandit. Turning around, everyone sees Hans with axes in his hands. Our hero swings another axe with the aim of killing someone else. With all his might, Hans throws another axe into the crowd of enemies and eliminates another gang member. Hans then runs to a place prepared for battle, where he has more axes hidden. Hans, having no weapons, begins to eliminate one bandit after another using only axes. With centimeter precision, Hans eliminates another bandit. Hans then goes into a melee attack and jumps into the crowd of enemies. While in the air, Hans manages to knock out another bandit with his foot. We see that our hero is surrounded by enemies, but he still hopes to survive and defeat them. Hans begins to be attacked by bandits and he begins to eliminate the gang. While destroying one after another, our hero looks around and manages to repel attacks from behind. The fight continues, and Hans is not losing yet and manages to destroy about 6 people. We see boss take out his gun and is about to shoot Hans. However, because he is surrounded by his subordinates, the boss is unable to fire a shot. Hans continues to eliminate one bastard after another. He has no equal in hand-to-hand combat, because in the future he survived for 3 years in such conditions. Hans then notices a rifle lying on the floor and jumps after it. Standing up, Hans takes the safety off his rifle and says that this is the end for all his enemies. The bandits see weapons in Hans's hands and literally wet their pants from fear. Hans pulls the trigger of his rifle and starts shooting all the bandits. However, the boss runs away from the battlefield like a coward, and Hans does not have time to catch up with him. We see that our hero has dealt with all the freaks. Suddenly, Hans hears a familiar sound. He comes to the edge of the roof and is horrified. He sees that a huge wave of zombies has approached his building, eager to devour everyone in the building. Hans realizes that he has very little time left. He knows that among these zombies there must be a mutant who is leading them all. Hans goes down into the building and sees that the zombies have broken through. Hans runs into another room and kicks down the doors. He sees that the guy whom boss had previously interrogated and beaten was left here. Hans opens this guy's mouth. Hans begins to bring the big guy back to his senses so that he can save him. Hans asks who he is and what his name is and offers to go with him. The guy replies that his name is Jin, and he is a good person, and that he used to do martial arts. The main character cuts the ropes off Jin and saves him. Hans says that by working as a team, the two of them can survive this difficult situation. Next, we see Hans and Jin fighting zombies together. Jin shows off his fighting skills and smashes zombies. He spins his air kicks like a true master of sports. From Jin's blows, zombies fly several meters and fall. Hans is surprised by this skill, and he likes that he now has a great partner. Jin says that Hans can count on Hans's help. At this moment, we see the boss standing above and taking aim. The boss hits Hans's torso and wounds him. We understand that Hans is really seriously injured because he is bleeding from the mouth. Hans begins to lose consciousness and passes out. Meanwhile, we are shown the events that take place in Hans's camp. It turns out that a wave of zombies has also attacked Hans's camp, and without his main protector, the people are doomed. People save themselves by leaving the main camp area, and Zhang Huang gives people time. Zhang Huang is abandoned by the rest of the people and they run away. However, the zombies penetrate even deeper into the camp, damaging all the barriers. We see that people were not prepared for this because without Hans, no one was monitoring the situation. A horde of hundreds of zombies enters the camp and begins to devour everyone in their path. People in horror understand that they need to run, since they will not be able to fight against such a number of monsters. Suddenly, a zombie bites one of the girls on the hand. However, a guy saves her and throws the zombie aside. There are too many infected and it is impossible to resist them. All remaining survivors begin to flee to the basement. Luckily, the door to the basement is open and everyone starts running there. Miraculously, the last person manages to close the door behind him. After the zombie attack, we realize that there are about 15 people left in the camp. The girl says that she is feeling dizzy from stress, and the guy who saved her earlier starts to calm her down. The girl feels cared for and is touched by it. Also, another guy feels tired and is being consoled. Suddenly, he turns into a zombie because during the battle with the zombies, he was most likely bitten. Having turned into a zombie, he bites the first person he comes across. At this point, we are shown that the girl who was feeling unwell also turned into a zombie and bit someone on the hand. The situation is taking a very tragic turn. We are shown Hans coming to his senses. He suddenly hits Jin in the face because he doesn't have time to understand where he is. Jin flinches from the blow and says he's a friend. Jin tells Hans that he saved him from the boss and the zombies by dragging him into another room. Hans shows that he has armor, but the bullet was unable to penetrate it, only causing minor damage. At this moment, the guys hear some strange sound and prepare for the worst. The same guy who called himself a cleaner comes into the room. He says that he is ready to fight on Hans and Jin's side because he wants to destroy the gang and the boss. The janitor convinces Hans to take him along because he wants to help and be useful. In the next scene, we see that the janitor actually fights well against the zombies. 3 guys confront a crowd of zombies and come up with a plan to escape from here. Jin also fights with all his strength, and we see that he is indeed a very capable guy with muscles. Hans comes up with a plan to escape this wave of zombies and calls everyone inside. We see 3 guys surrounded by a crowd of zombies. The glass begins to fail and crack under the pressure of the monsters. Suddenly, Hans shoots at another window and tells everyone to run after him. Hans makes a way for himself and his new friends. A group of zombies appears in front of them again, however. The cleaner says that he can handle them alone. Jin and Hans watch as a guy takes out an entire horde of zombies single-handedly. The janitor says he has his own fighting style, and he does it beautifully, energetically, and with taste. Turning around, the janitor says that if you're going to fight zombies, you have to do it cool. The guys deal with all the zombies in this part of the building and decide to leave it through the subway. They go down into the subway and walk with a flashlight. Suddenly, the guys notice some strange silhouette in front of them. The janitor shines a light forward, and we realize that we are about to see one of the mutants for the first time. Shining a light on it, the heroes see a mutant, which Hans calls a locust. Hans tells his new friends that this mutant has fast speed and fights with all 4 limbs. He also has good eyesight and senses movements with his antennae. Hans tells Jin to cover him from behind, and tells the cleaner to shine a flashlight on the locusts. Hans then takes aim and prepares to attack the monster. Hans hits the monster's eyes and antennae right on target, taking away his incredible charm. However, the monster does not die and moreover is going to attack in response, because he still has hearing and smell. Hans shoots at the monster, but it still remains very fast. The locust jumps at Hans, but he manages to dodge it. The janitor loses sight of the monster, and Hans cannot see it. At the last moment, the cleaner finds the monster with a flashlight and illuminates it, but it is too late. The mutated zombie jumps on Hans and attacks him. Hans ducks and shoots back at the monster. It hits the monster's hand and stops it from swinging its arms. Jin notices another crowd of zombies running from behind. He understands that if he does not protect the rear of his friends, they will die and rushes into battle. Hans continues to fight against the locusts. The monster also attempts to attack Hans. Our hero doesn't have time to dodge and at the last moment impales the locust on his knife. The monster falls on Hans and he can't do anything. Suddenly, an axe thrown by the cleaner flies towards Hans. Hans grabs an axe and rips the rest of the head off the locust's shoulders. Hans then jumps to the side to take a more advantageous position. Our main character cuts off the monster's right leg. However, at that moment, the mutated zombie attacks Hans with the last of its strength. Our leader understands that now is the time for him to end this battle. With a powerful blow, he cuts the monster into 2 parts. After this, he takes his machine gun and shoots the crowd of zombies, who by this time had managed to approach from the front. Hans stops shooting and calls the janitor to finish off the rest of the zombies. The cleaner happily runs to fulfill Hans's request, because destroying monsters is his favorite job. Hans watches with pleasure how coolly the cleaner copes with the remains of the zombies. We see our main character reloading his weapon. They fire the entire clip at the remaining zombies so that they don't have time to use regeneration. The guys remember that they haven't seen Jin for a long time, who was supposed to cover them from the zombies from behind, and they start looking for him. They find him a little further into the tunnels, covered in zombie blood, and we realize that Jin has done his job and was able to protect their rear and stay alive. The Trinity finds an exit from the tunnel and is about to get to the surface. Hans says they need to hurry since they haven't destroyed the boss. The main character calls these 2 with him to help him finish off the boss, because strong people should stick together, and besides, he was convinced that they can be trusted. We see that our heroes are walking down the street in broad daylight and so far there is no danger nearby. Hans feels that now is a good time to discuss future plans. He stops and says he needs to ask these 2 guys one question. Before this, the cleaner asks him who he is and where he got such survival skills, and why he is not afraid to die. Hans replies that he is not afraid to die because he has died before. The guys are surprised by this answer and don't know how to react to it. However, Hans says that he was joking and is simply a very talented person, and that is why he was able to survive all this time. Next, Hans invites the guys to join his camp, which is located nearby. Jin replies that he wanted to continue to survive together, and the cleaner replies the same. Hans tells them that the camp has rules that they must follow, or they will not be able to live with the others. Hans also said that he wants to create an alliance of several camps that will help each other and protect themselves from cannibals. Jin and the janitor had never heard of living people eating each other before, but Hans said that this was exactly the kind of gang they would be defending themselves against in the future. Our main character also warned these 2 that if they ever betrayed him or anyone from the camp, he would kill them. After this, Hans called to follow him. Arriving at the camp, our characters see that the entrance to it is destroyed. Hans begins to worry about the lives of the people in the camp. Upon entering, the group saw zombie corpses, and everyone realized that the monsters had broken through the barriers due to a zombie wave that night. At this moment, some silhouette starts running towards Hans. As he ran closer, he saw the familiar face of the woman who lived in the camp. For a second, Hans thinks and remembers who she was. He remembered that she had 3 children, and that she did everything to protect them. However, Hans has no choice but to eliminate her. We see Hans's serious face, and one can only imagine the pain he is experiencing now. Hans tells the others that they need to find survivors from the camp and go inside. Hans knocks down the doors leading down. They walk down the stairs and suddenly start hearing some strange sounds. Hans looks in horror at someone's silhouette in the darkness, and realizes that it is most likely his friend from the camp who has become a zombie. He asks Jin to shine a light into the darkness. We see that it is a young girl from the camp who is eating a human corpse. The cleaner wanted to deal with her, but Jin stopped him, saying that it was Hans's personal business. Silently, the main character goes down to her and understands what he must do now. He eliminates another former member of the camp. Then our heroes go inside and see that the losses do not end there. Hans runs to the door leading to the utility room and opens it. At this moment, Hans hopes that there might be another survivor hiding here. And indeed, about 15 people from the camp who managed to survive were hiding in the room the whole time. Hans says that the area is cleared and it is safe to leave. Hans tells everyone what happened to him over the past 24 hours. And they also tell him about the events that took place in the camp. The main character introduces new guys to the camp. Next, Hans and Jin clear the rooftop area of zombies. They check every room to make sure there is not a single monster left on the campgrounds. When Hans starts to open the doors, he hears some strange sounds coming from there. The next second, the charming Siri appears before him. She is so happy to see Hans that she rushes at him and hugs him. She cries because she thought she would never see our main character again. There is a cleaner standing behind him, pointing with his finger that the girl is very beautiful. Siri, out of jealousy, begins to ask who the girl is with him, but Hans replies that it is a guy and his nickname is the Cleaner. The next moment, another person comes out of the room. We see that it is Jung Hwan and he says that Hans is late. Hans replies that he is incredibly happy to see him as a human and not a zombie. Hans praises the two of them for being smart and surviving, unlike half the camp. Hans then announces to everyone that from now on the camp will be divided into several groups. Some squads will be searching for supplies, others will be repelling zombie attacks, and others will be preparing food and sewing clothes. Hans says that the search party will consist of him, the janitor, and Jin. Sari replies that she also wants to join the search party to find her sister. However, Hans refuses her, citing the fact that she will be the weak link. However, Jin says that if they find surviving girls, they will never go with a group that is all guys. Sari realizes that Hans has no choice but to take her with him. Hans then instructs Jung Hwan on how to behave in his absence, namely to always be prepared and not to relax. Hans says he's going to find Sari's sister, and so the new detachment, now called the Search Group, sets out on reconnaissance. Jin copes with his task of destroying zombies. Overall, the entire group, consisting of our 4 characters, looks very combat ready. Our heroes have found food and are now going to take it to the camp. Jin screams that there is someone behind Hans. He turns around and sees a zombie running towards him. Hans takes out his sword and is about to finish off the monster. However, Sari screams that it is her sister. And indeed, we see a zombie who looks very similar to Sari, even in her hair color. Hans tells Sari to kill her sister because she has become a monster. He holds her by the hair and gives the girl the opportunity to do it. At first, Sari says that she can't kill her own sister, but Hans tells her to be strong. After this, Sari eliminates her sister. The girl cries because this was the last person close to her, but Hans encourages her and says that now she has a new family. The girl gets up and comes to her senses. She says words of gratitude to Hans. Hans then hands out radios to everyone and says that this way they can maintain contact. In the next scene, we see that our heroes have found a clothing store and updated their appearance. Now they look incredibly cool. Next, Hans plans to search the nearby hospital with his search party. He says that it would be advisable for them to find a doctor or nurse for the needs of the camp and make friends with them. We see that our group has already arrived at the hospital. Once inside, they discover zombie corpses, and Hans realizes that there may be survivors here. Our search party is able to find good survivors for the first time, and they are ready to continue searching for them. Hans approaches a locked door and assumes there may be survivors behind it. He shoots at the ceiling to get the door open for him. A girl's voice was actually heard behind the door, asking them to leave. Hans is happy about this. Sari is surprised that Hans figured out where the survivors might be hiding. Hans then loudly says that he will leave food at the door. That's exactly what he did, leaving bacon, cookies, and soda at the door. A few minutes later, the door opened a little and we saw that the girl wanted to see the situation. She sees that they really left her some food, as they said. A girl in a medical gown looks around and wants to take the food. However, at that moment, Hans comes out and she tries to stab him with a knife, but he knocks it out. The girl looks up and sees a tall, muscular guy with red hair in front of her. She is afraid of him and thinks that now he will harm her. Hans looks around the room and sees that there are traces of a group of people there. He asks the girl where the others are. However, the girl is afraid of him and does not tell him anything. Hans explains to her that he does not intend to harm her in any way and wants to be friends. Hans calls Sari and asks her to bring her food for this girl. The nurse is very surprised that there is a girl in this group and that she will now be fed. In the next scene, we see that the girl was given food. Hans asks where the rest of her group is. The nurse replies that they are close. Suddenly, we see a dark silhouette of a man behind Hans, swinging a bat at him. Sari manages to warn Hans about the danger lurking behind him literally half a second before the tragedy. With a sharp blow of the pistol handle, Hans warns of the impending danger and pushes the attacker away. The man falls to the ground from a strong blow from the main character, and we see a group of people, consisting of 5 people, who are surprised by what happened. Hans tells the attacking man to thank fate because he had a gun in his hands, and not his favorite blade, which would have finished off the attacker in an instant. The man who attacked Hans, lying on the floor, asks our characters to leave this place, since this is their own camp, and they do not intend to contact anyone. The stranger said that his name was Tom, and they perceive everyone who comes here as bandits and murderers, because they already had such a case. Hans says that he and his group came to this place to find supplies and survivors, after which they offer the survivors to form an alliance and cooperate. Hans asks the strangers, despite the fact that they attacked him, if they would like to form an alliance with his camp to survive together, share resources and help each other. These people were very surprised by Hans's proposal, since they had only known each other for a few minutes and had never met anyone as friendly as him before. The doctor then says that they do not want to contact anyone because they are afraid, because 3 days ago a terrible incident happened, after which they do not trust anyone and are going to leave this place. The doctor approaches the window opposite our heroes and is going to show them something. The doctor opens the curtains, and our characters see a sign on the window that was written in blood by some bandits, after which the doctor begins to tell what exactly happened. He says that about 3 days ago, they were sitting quietly in their camp and thinking about how they would find food, because they were already starting to starve without food. Suddenly, they heard the sound of motorcycles outside the window and some shouts. They opened the window and saw a couple running through the city streets, consisting of a young girl and a young guy, who were apparently running away from some kind of danger. However, they were not running from zombies or monsters, but from evil people who had a terrible appearance and rode motorcycles. That gang had weapons of bats and sticks, and their number was about 20 people. They saw that the bandits had caught up with the young people and beaten them up badly for fun, all the while smiling and laughing as if it brought them nothing but pleasure. After this, the bandit tied the young man to a motorcycle and dragged him down the street, thereby killing him. At that moment, the camp closed the curtains so as not to see all the horror that was happening on the streets, and also so that the bandits would not see their camp. The camp members could not help those young people because they did not have the weapons or strength to do so they continued to just sit and be afraid. Suddenly they heard some noise in the window, and with great fear the man decided to open the curtains and see what was going on there. Opening the curtain, he saw the crazy face of the bandit, who looked at them and said that now they know where there are more people so that they can play with them later. After this, an inscription appeared on the window, which the bandits made with the remains and blood of a young guy whom they had just killed in front of the camp. Hans, after hearing this story, says that if this camp joins their alliance, he will provide them with food and protection from these evil people. In exchange, they will follow the rules he sets and cooperate. Hans hands the man a radio that they will use to communicate and interact between the camps. The man is surprised by such kindness from Hans, and does not believe that there are still normal guys left on Earth at the present time. However, they begin to negotiate cooperation, and the camp they found accepts Hans's offer to form an alliance with his camp. At this point, Hans sets another condition for cooperation, namely that their doctor must go with them to live in the main camp, since there are more people there, and they need the help of a doctor. The men don't want to give up the doctor because he is their leader, and their hope for medical protection in case of any injuries. The doctor says he agrees to move to the new camp on the condition that his people are provided with protection, including the fact that there are many zombies in this building that need help to deal with. Tom says that they don't have weapons, so they still haven't been able to clear the hospital territory of monsters, and that's why every second they are in danger not only from those bandits, but also from the zombies outside the door. Hans turns around and asks Sari to open the door leading to a hallway where a large group of zombies are located. The camp members scream in horror and ask not to do this, as they will not be able to cope with such a danger and everyone in this room will die and be eaten. Sari slowly opens the door, behind which strange sounds are heard, and the camp members begin to hide in hopes of avoiding the emerging danger. However, they are faced with a view of a mountain of zombie corpses that the janitor and Jin had built while Hans was talking to the survivors. The cleaner says that Hans was in a hurry to open the door because they wanted to make a real surprise and build a whole tower or a beautiful large statue out of the zombie corpses. Hans tells the camp members that his camp members are very prepared, strong, and fearless people who are able to take care of not only themselves, but also other survivors. He introduces his search party to his new acquaintances, and people see that this is indeed an incredibly confident, equipped, and prepared group of adventurers who have the most serious intentions, and Hans says that now they will clear the hospital territory of zombies. The people from the new camp are shocked by what they saw and still cannot fully believe that these 4 people are capable of clearing their large building of monsters without even applying maximum effort. Next, we are shown that Hans's squad has moved into the hospital corridors to clear the area of zombies, which they are doing quite well, but too slowly, since the zombies are in the patients' rooms. Hans comes up with a way to speed up this process and shoots a pistol at the ceiling to attract monsters to the noise from the shot. As usual, the zombies react to loud noise and begin to emerge from their chambers directly into the hands of our cleanup squad. Hans, maintaining his usual composure, destroys one zombie after another, just like his comrades. Next, our characters go straight down the corridors and find a door that is closed by members of the camp with various mops and sticks, and they conclude that there are even more zombies behind this door. Hans says that they can't leave it like this, and that the entire hospital area needs to be cleared, so they open the locked door. At this moment, a huge crowd of angry and aggressive zombies, who are very hungry and have already partially rotted from not having eaten anyone for a very long time, jumps on our characters from the open room. One of these zombies jumps on the cleaner and he notices the danger only at the very last moment, when it is too late to dodge the bite. Hans yells at the janitor to duck down and kills the zombie, attacking the janitor with a precise shot to the head. However, after Hans's second shot, more zombies start to emerge from the chambers, thus locking our characters in a bad situation, since now they have no escape route. Meanwhile, the members of the new camp fight off zombies at the entrance to the room where they live, as Hans ordered them to provide protection from behind and gave them weapons to do so. Tom says that while Hans and his squad are clearing the main area of the hospital, they should guard the stairs they climbed in the rear. Next, we see our squad breaking through a crowd of zombies, destroying anyone who gets in their way. The cleaner displays particular fury and dexterity, whose axe eliminates any monster it touches. We see that Hans's squad managed to clear the hospital's Aspen territory of zombies, and now its inhabitants are safe and can exist in peace. Hans and his squad return to their new acquaintances and say that almost the entire territory is cleared, and they will no longer worry about their lives. Hans then says that they will now return to their main camp taking the doctor, but will return here tomorrow with new food, clothing, and other necessary resources. During this time, Hans leaves all the food they took with them as a guarantee that his squad will return. Tom thanks Hans for his help and cooperation and realizes that the hospital camp was actually very lucky this time to have been found by such good people. The doctor takes with him medicines, drugs, and various medical devices to supply Hans's main camp, and our characters are about to set out. Suddenly, Hans is called by the main camp on the radio, and is informed that the military has arrived at the camp, and is demanding that some of the camp's food products be transferred to them to support the active army. Hans is very surprised that, firstly, after so much time, there is still an army left in their city, and secondly, that these people are so impudent as to take food from ordinary people. Hans says that they urgently need to move to the main camp, and that no food should be given to anyone until he arrives. Hans's detachment, together with the doctor, set out for the main camp, which was about a 15-minute walk away. Suddenly, Hans fires a pistol into the air, attracting the attention of a huge crowd of zombies located nearby. All the people are again surprised at how Hans is acting and say that he has just put them in great danger. Hans says he has a plan for what to do next and tells everyone to run to the main camp. All members of the squad except Hans flee to the base camp, leaving Hans alone, as that is what he said to do. We understand that Hans has come up with his next plan, with the help of which he will deal with the new threat to his camp. Just a few seconds later, he is surrounded by a huge crowd of zombies, which he lured by shooting into the air. After this, the main character also starts running to the main camp, but by a different route. In the next scene, we see the military standing near the food warehouse, waiting for Hans to arrive, as the people refuse to share their food in his absence. A few minutes later, a sweaty Hans approaches them, apparently having been running all this time to come up with his plan to resolve the situation. The soldiers introduce themselves to him, and say that they are soldiers of the city's active army, and that they are hungry, and demand that Hans's camp share food at any cost. Hans says they will share food if they answer a few of his questions. First, Hans asked which unit these soldiers belonged to and where their superiors were. This question put the commander of the soldiers, named Jim, in an awkward position. From his appearance, Hans understands that these soldiers have not communicated with their leadership for a long time, which is most likely no longer alive, and that now they are on their own, and most likely do not obey anyone. Next, Hans is about to ask his second question and looks at the weapons these soldiers are wearing. In particular, Hans looks at the rifle that the soldiers have and wonders if they have cartridges for them. Suddenly, Hans tells the soldiers that he knows they don't have a single bullet, and that his unit, unlike them, is fully armed. This frightens the soldiers' commander, Jim, as he realizes that they actually do not have a single live round of ammunition with them. The situation escalates, and members of Hans's camp point their guns at the soldiers, who also point their rifles at our characters. However, Hans says he is willing to share the food because he respects the soldiers' service and wants to support them in this way. Jim is surprised by Hans's decision, because in his opinion, these people from the camp could easily finish off his squad and take their rifles and everything they have with them. Hans says he wants to know the answer to his last question, namely where the army's ammunition depot is located. The soldier says that he cannot answer this question because they have state secrets and information about the location of this warehouse is a guarded secret. Hans accepts this answer and asks how much food the soldiers want to take with them. To this, Jim replies that they will take half of all the food that is in Hans's camp. The people in the camp start to get upset about this, and one of the soldiers tells everyone to shut their mouths and stop being unhappy. Sari says that soldiers should be grateful for the people helping them, and soldiers should treat these people with respect. However, the soldier did not like Sari's answer, and he approaches her and says that he will now shut her mouth by force, and that she should sit silently in the corner while the men talk. With one movement of his hand, Hans coldly and confidently squeezes the face of the impudent soldier and tells him to calm down. Otherwise, he will drive all the soldiers out of the camp and will not give them even one bag of food. The soldier's superior, Jim, orders the brash sergeant to calm down and step back, because he is indeed behaving very brazenly. However, People still don't understand why Hans just gives half of all the food supplies to the soldiers, because food is very important for the camp now, especially considering the fact that they found new survivors. Hans says to trust him and not interfere with the implementation of his plan. People fall silent and understand that if Hans said that he had a plan, that everything would be fine, and that they needed to follow it. The soldiers begin to collect food supplies and prepare them for transportation, as they arrived here in a car that they left near the store. The leader of the detachment of soldiers thanks Hans for his cooperation, and having taken the half of the food he promised, the soldiers go outside. At this time, Hans calls the cleaner to him and says that there is a special and very important task for him. The cleaner understands that if Hans has such an expression on his face, it means he is planning something really insidious. We see the soldiers, having taken the food supplies, walking towards their truck, which was left near the store. They are happy that they managed to get food supplies, and that now they have about a week until they run out again, and they have time to find more food. Suddenly, the military sees that in the place where they left the car, there is a huge crowd of zombies that has blocked the way, and they will not pass by them. The soldiers are very surprised by this, because when they arrived there a few hours ago, there were no zombies nearby, and everything was clean in this area. Soldiers begin to leave half of the food they take so that they can move faster and have a chance to survive. However, one zombie notices the sergeant and attacks him, and the soldier is forced to use force, creating noise in the process. The sound of the fight attracts the attention of several zombies who are standing at the edge of the crowd, and they look towards the soldiers. We see that a chain reaction has started, and now the entire crowd of zombies notices the soldiers and heads towards them to taste the meat from the military. The first one they come across is Private Clinton, who after numerous bites from the monsters will also turn into a zombie in a few minutes and join their crowd, of course, if there is anything left of him. The leader of the soldiers shouts to retreat, as they have no ammunition to resist the crowd of zombies, and this crowd is too big and can easily kill them. The soldiers take the food and run back to the store where Hans's camp is located, as this is their last chance to survive. In the background, we see the last seconds of an army private named Clint, who begs to be saved, but we realize it is too late to do so. The soldiers are horrified by this picture and throw food on the ground in the hope that they can run faster and save themselves from certain death. However, the soldiers on the rescue route see an obstacle in the form of trucks and understand that their path is cut off, and soon they will all die. At that moment, a volley of homemade slingshots made by members of Hans's camp is fired from the roof of the trucks into the crowd of zombies. The soldiers froze in anticipation of a miracle, and they began to hope that they would be saved by these people from the fate of being eaten by zombies. They see the silhouette of Hans and his squad on the roof of the truck, who says that he can save the soldiers, but to do so they will have to fulfill several conditions. The soldiers are happy about this, and say that they will do anything to survive in this incredibly difficult situation. Before this, Hans expresses his dissatisfaction with the fact that the soldiers left half of the food they gave them, because it was very valuable. Jim apologizes to Hans for this decision, but explains that if they had not left the food, they would have died because they ran slowly with the boxes. Hans forgives them for the loss of food and says that in order to be saved, the soldiers will have to show him on the map where the army's ammunition and grenade depot is, otherwise he will not save them. Hans shows his pistol to the soldiers, showing that his camp is armed and will be able to save them if the soldiers agree to the condition. We see a huge wave of zombies approaching from behind the military, and they have only seconds left to give their answer. The soldiers look at our character's squad and realize that these people, led by Hans, are an incredibly strong and determined community that is capable of fighting back against any threat. The squad leader, Jim, agrees to Hans's conditions to show where the ammunition depot is in exchange for saving his life and the lives of his comrades. Hans descends from the barrier towards the soldiers along with the cleaner and Jin, and begins clearing the area. The janitor, in his usual manner, takes on the right side of the crowd, chopping up all the zombies with an axe and making jokes while doing so. A calmer Jin takes over the left flank and deals with the monsters on his part of the territory, leaving them no chance due to his mastery of martial arts. The military are stunned by the skill and passion with which these two literally wipe out a crowd of terrible zombies in minutes and cannot believe their eyes, because in comparison to them they seem like harmless boys. Hans, with a smile on his face as if nothing had happened, approaches Jim and asks him to show him on the map the location of the ammunition depot he needed, as they had agreed to save their lives. The soldiers mark the location of the army depot on the map and ask to be allowed to leave, giving them at least some food. Hans says that he will only let the soldiers go if they leave all their weapons, and what's more, he will now only give them 25% of the food he gave them initially. The military is shocked by this decision and asks why he is taking away their weapons and why he is giving them so little food to take with them. Hans says that this is the price for saving them and punishment for the impudence they showed when they came to the camp of ordinary people and thought that they would take food for free. The soldiers realize that in this situation they have no choice, and Hans had calculated everything too well, so they give all the weapons they have to the people from our main character's camp. Next, Hans talks to Jin and the cleaner, and now they understand what exactly the protagonist's plan was. Hans asks Jung Hwan to increase vigilance on the borders of their territory, so that no one, including a military man, enters the camp without our main character's knowledge. And Hans also says that he brought a doctor to the camp. After this, he calls a girl from the camp to him, and tells her to cook something very tasty to eat and feed the doctor, and also to give her the opportunity to rest. The girl perceives Hans's instructions as a particularly important mission, and declares with full responsibility that she will cope with the task. Hans shows the camp to the doctor, and says that very soon they will equip him with a medical facility, in which he could work normally. The doctor thanks Hans for such kindness, and says that he likes this place, and will make a positive contribution to its development. A few minutes later, Hans leads a clearing party to make room for the military to retreat. He is met by a crowd of zombies, who are meanwhile finishing off the remains of one of the soldiers, whom they managed to bite first. Hans, keeping an impartial expression on his face, walks towards danger, preparing his pistol for battle. A precise shot to the head, and the first of the crowd of zombies falls to the ground, thereby attracting the attention of the rest of the crowd. We see that the zombies heard a loud sound, move away from the borders of the camp and go further behind Hans. The soldiers leave the camp and wonder where the monsters have gone, because an hour ago there were about 100 of them here. Jin says that he and his squad, on Hans's orders, will escort them to the truck to keep them safe. The road of zombie corpses tells us that Hans led the bulk of the crowd away, allowing the military group and Jin to pass. Jin deals with the rest of the zombie horde without much effort, and leads the group of soldiers to their destination. Approaching the car, Jin sees that all the zombies around it have already been killed, and the area has been cleared of monsters. Hans comes out from behind the car and says that they were walking too slowly, and he cleared the way to the car himself. Siri, as always, is pleasantly impressed by Hans's behavior and talks about how strong her feelings are for him. The soldiers load the food donated to them into a car and prepare to leave for their camp. The leader of the squad of soldiers, Jin, thanks Hans for his assistance and hopes that this is not their last meeting. The soldiers leave, and Sari says that she hasn't seen the cleaner for a long time and doesn't know where he went. Hans tells her to look at the roof of the truck as it drives away. We see that the cleaner has hidden on the roof of this car and is driving along with it unnoticed. Sari asks why this had to be done. Hans replies that this way they will know where this group of soldiers lives and whether they pose a threat to the camp, because if they are dangerous, then Hans will have to eliminate them. The cleaner on the roof of the car thinks that he will cope with the task assigned to him at any cost, since this mission is very important for the camp. Arriving at their camp, the soldiers begin to unload food supplies, and during their conversation we understand that the supplies are needed for the children they are guarding. However, at this moment we are shown that while the soldiers were not in the camp, someone attacked them and killed their comrades. We see that they died not from zombies, but from the atrocities of people, because one of the soldiers was brutally crucified on boards. The cleaner sees all this and understands that the situation here is very bad. He also discovers traces of motorcycles and realizes that this is all the work of the people they heard about earlier. From the inscription on the building's facade, the cleaner understands that the same gang was here as near the hospital. The janitor calls Hans on the radio and reports to him the information he has learned. Hans goes to check the walls of their shop and finds the same inscription written in blood. The main character understands that this gang of bastards marks places where people live in order to later return to them and mock people. Hans tells Jung Hwan to strengthen security, set up observation posts, and prepare to repel enemy attacks. Hans is convinced that these bastards will attack them sooner or later, and he will have to defend this camp, even if it means eliminating the entire gang. Hans shows this inscription to the rest of the camp and asks them not to tell other people about it for now. In his head, Hans thinks about the Sole Survivors Alliance, who in the future became the main problem for humanity and caused the death of hundreds of people, and that this gang may have some connection with the Alliance. Hans is talking to the newcomers to the camp, namely 3 guys and 1 girl. He notices that one of the newcomers, named Ralph, has a very powerful physical build and large muscles. Hans tells Ralph that he is to join a search party consisting of Jin, Siri, the janitor, and Hans himself, while the rest of the new recruits will be sent to the second camp at the hospital. Ralph says that the other newcomers are his relatives, and he is responsible for their lives, so he does not want to be separated from them. Hans says that it is a 15-minute walk from here to the hospital, and Ralph will be able to see them every day, and Ralph agrees to the protagonist's proposal. However, Hans asks Jung Hwan to keep an eye on all the newcomers and report to him anything interesting. The next day, Hans visits the camp at the hospital and brings them food and new clothes, which the people happily accept. Hans also gives the new camp firearms that he took from the military and ammunition for them. Tom says he thought Hans wouldn't come back and he's now pleasantly surprised. Next, Hans's search party studies the map on which the soldiers marked the location of the weapons depot and says that they need to get to it. The squad members ask how many weapons they should take from there. To this, Hans replies that they will take absolutely all weapons from there, no matter what they may be. The squad members are not surprised by Hans's answer, but as usual they feel slightly uncomfortable when Hans makes such an expression. A few hours later, we see that Hans and his squad are beginning to survey the immediate area around the hospital in order to secure this new camp as much as possible. Hans finds canned food that someone has recently eaten, and realizes that someone has been watching the hospital camp all this time. Then Hans hears Sari's scream coming from another room. Entering inside, Hans sees the mafia boss who escaped from him a week ago pinned to the wall. Hans realizes that someone else found him and killed him, and now they are really in trouble. Near his two camps, there is a gang of bastards on motorcycles that urgently needs to be eliminated. Later that night, Hans rests in the main camp, lying on the floor. Suddenly, he hears strange sounds and immediately moves towards their source. As he goes down the stairs, he wonders what it could be. Perhaps bandits have infiltrated the camp. However, the source of the noise is a couple of young people who decided to retire from prying eyes in a secluded place. Hans becomes embarrassed and realizes that he has been overly vigilant lately and is about to leave. However, on his way, Zhang Huan appears and asks what is going on. He also saw a young couple and became embarrassed. Hans says that it is better for them to leave the young couple alone and go away. Zhang Huan says he didn't know Hans had a penchant for secretly watching other people kiss. For his stupid words, Zhang Huan gets hit on the head, and our characters go down to their rooms. The next morning, we see the new members of Hans's camp actively training and improving their physical fitness. All this takes place under the strict control of our main character. He says that training is over for today and everyone should be ready to go on mission. Meanwhile, we are shown the events taking place in the soldiers' camp. Namely, that a surviving child is found there. The soldiers were glad that the children remained alive, and that they could find out from them what had happened there in their absence. The children say that on that day a gang of evil men on motorcycles appeared, killed the men, and then began to abuse the women, taking off their clothes. The cleaner reports everything he heard to Hans. Hans calls an emergency meeting to discuss the impending threat, and says that they need to prepare to fight the evil gang. People are asking how they will resist this gang of bastards. Hans replies that they will kill anyone who comes into the camp with bad intentions. The council members agree with Hans and say that they are waiting for instructions from Hans on how to proceed. This surprises our protagonist because just recently these people were cowards, but today they are a close-knit team. Hans is given a piece of paper with a list of rules for his camp written on it. The man says that these rules were developed by Hans himself, and people wrote them down and will follow him to the end. The remaining members of the camp enter the room and express words of support to Hans. Everyone says that they are waiting for instructions from him, because now Hans is their real leader and protector. The protagonist says that he will develop a plan to protect the two camps, since now every life is very important to him. At night, Hans draws up a defense plan and tries to take into account all the nuances, since there are two camps under his protection. Hans begins to get headaches from constant thoughts about dangers and human lives. He thinks there is a connection between these bastards and the Sole Survivors Alliance, which according to his calculations should already be increasing its strength. Suddenly, Hans realizes that the bastards who painted the graffiti don't have their own camp, so they ride motorcycles. Which means that either they're going to take over one of his camps, or they're going to leave the city and possibly join the Sole Survivors Alliance. At this moment, Sari comes to Hans and says that they need to go to dinner. Hans replies that he doesn't want to eat and is busy with work. Sari comes closer and says that Hans needs to rest more and eat food to have strength. Sari squeezes Hans's hand between her breasts and says that if he doesn't go eat, she will stay with him. After this, Hans realizes that he really needs to eat, otherwise Sari will pounce on him. While having dinner on the roof of a store, Hans hears strange sounds coming from the road. He looks through the night vision goggles to get a better look. The protagonist sees the headlights of motorcycles and realizes that the bandits are going to attack one of his camps, so he commands everyone over the radio to take positions. As we can see, the camp in the hospital prepared to repel the attack of the bandits. The main camp in the store has also taken up its positions and is awaiting the enemy's advance. They also blocked the underground passages to the store, setting up people and traps. Hans himself, along with Jin and Zhang Huan, took up a position between the hospital and the store in order to be there faster once we figured out which camp would be attacked first. Hans tells his comrades to kill the enemy without hesitation or regret because they know what horrors this gang commits. Zhang Huan and Jin understood Hans's order and were ready to act. The silence is broken by the sound coming from the radio station. Hansu reports to the camp at the hospital that the gang has attacked them. Hans's squad moves towards the hospital to help their people. Luckily, Hans gave the order to open the door leading to the crowd of zombies that they did not finish off last time. And upon entering the hospital, the gang met zombies, not people. Hans's squad went around the bandits from behind, and the main character hits the first freak with a pinpoint shot. The bandit falls into the hospital room and the others realize that they are trapped between zombies and Hans's squad. The main character's squad suppresses the remaining enemies with machine gun fire. After this, Zhang Huan closes the doors of the hospital, and the characters wonder why there were so few enemies here. Suddenly, Hans is told on the radio that the gang has attacked the main camp. Hans realizes that the attack on the hospital was just a distraction. Hans radios Sari, who is supposed to be on the roof of the store, but she doesn't answer. We see that by this time Sari has already been attacked. She lies on the ground covered in blood and can't do anything. There's a bastard from this gang sitting above her and telling her that he's going to have a good time with her now. He licks his lips, realizing that he is about to have a lot of fun and that there is no one to help her. Hans realizes that the bandits most likely managed to climb onto the roof of the building using special equipment. Fearing for the lives of his comrades, Hans and his squad move to the main camp to finish off these bastards once and for all. While walking down the street, an arrow flies past Hans's leg but does not hit him. Hans manages to dodge a volley of arrows from an unknown location at the last moment. However, the arrow hits the leg of Zhonghuan, who is slower than the protagonist. At the moment when they shot at Zhonghuan, the main character managed to see where the shooter was. Hans dodges more arrows and looks for a safe place. Jean helped his friend get to the car and saved him for a while. Hans runs to the car where his friends are sitting under aimed crossbow fire. Hans realizes that the bandits have also taken up their positions and have specifically positioned themselves so that they can attack him. Fireworks are thrown out of the window towards Hans and his friends. A firework falls near Hans and begins to explode, making loud noises. A crowd of zombies hear this sound and begin to move towards the source, and at the same time towards our characters. Hans begins shooting back at the monsters and realizes that due to Zhonghuan's injury and poor position, they are in a very dire situation. Hans asks Jin if he can throw fireworks to the place where they are shooting from. Jin replies that he can do it. Hans counts to 3 and suddenly rushes forward, attracting attention and giving Jin the opportunity to throw fireworks through the window. Next, we are shown events that took place half an hour earlier. On the roof of the store, Sari and Ralph stand in their positions. Sari says she heard some suspicious sound from another part of the wall. She goes to check on him because Ralph was afraid to go there. However, Ralph notices that the door to the roof is open, even though they closed it when they moved into position. Turning back, Sari sees that Ralph is lying unconscious, and there are 2 bandits standing behind him. One of them says that they are very lucky to have met such a beautiful girl with such a great figure. Sari realizes that she is in a very difficult situation, and she only has a few seconds to make a decision. The girl takes out a revolver with a sharp movement and aims it at her offenders. The bandits were shocked by the girl's behavior, because they didn't know that she had a gun. Sari's first shot misses and the tattooed-faced bandit moves out of the line of fire. The second bandit runs towards the girl with a bat, but for him it turns out to be a mistake. With a precise shot to the chest, the girl stops the insolent man approaching her. However, for a second she loses sight of the tattooed bandit and he knocks her down. Sari lies on the floor and cannot move because the blow to her head was very strong for her. The bastard starts to pull the girl's clothes off, and we understand that something bad is about to happen. Sari begins to resist, but he puts a revolver in her mouth and says that if she does anything again, he will kill her. Sari spreads her legs in front of the bandit and says that he can do whatever he wants with her. The bandit is surprised by this but continues to undress the girl. Sari hugs the bandit and makes it clear that she's going to kiss him now. From the girl's expression, we understand that this was her plan. With both hands, she grabs the bastard's head and presses her fingers on his eyes. At this moment, she pushes the bandit away from her with a blow of both legs. Rising to her feet, the girl takes out a knife and realizes that now she must decide to commit another murder. Suddenly, she feels pain in her cheek and realizes that she has been shot. Luckily, the bullet only grazed her face slightly and she is alive. The blinded bandit shoots in all directions in the hope of hitting the girl. Sari suddenly rushes forward towards the bandit, wanting to finish him off. However, the bastard manages to grab her and stop our character's attack. He brings the revolver to the girl's head and pulls the trigger, but because he had been shooting before, he ran out of bullets. Having gathered her last strength into a single hole, the girl deals with her offender and puts an end to this battle. Never before had she been so decisive in her actions and confident. She looks at the defeated enemy and thinks that Hans taught her to be like this. At this time, the main character runs towards the bandit shooting from the window and gains time. Jin throws a firework towards the bandit and hits the window. However, at that moment, an arrow was already fired towards Hans, which flies at incredible speed. There is a split second left before the arrow hits Hans right in the head. However, time seems to stop around him and Hans manages to dodge. The arrow misses the main character and Jin notices this, not understanding how Hans managed to do this. The protagonist shouts at Jin to take Zhonghuan and go to the main camp. Jin follows Hans's orders and takes away the wounded Zhonghuan. At this time, Hans shoots the zombies and attracts the attention of the other monsters, giving his comrades the opportunity to escape. The bulk of the zombies actually run towards the main character. Jin deals with the rest of the zombie horde and heads to the main camp. Hans is in a state of shock from how he dodged the arrow, because as far as he understands, time really seemed to stop. His right hand is shaking and his inner instinct tells him that he can now predict danger. Sounds are heard from above and Hans comes to his senses, realizing that he only has to deal with the bandits. A minute later, a group of bandits comes down to kill Hans, but they don't see him. The main character cold-bloodedly shoots the bastards who came out. This is his revenge for all those whose lives they ruined. With the hand of a dead bandit, he closes the entrance doors to prevent zombies from breaking into the building. Hans slowly climbs the stairs and talks about the role he plays in the lives of the people in the camp. He realizes that there are real bastards behind this door, and if he doesn't kill them, they will destroy his camp. His hand trembles, warning him of danger. Suddenly, a zombie appears behind Hans, which our hero notices too late. The monster pounces on the protagonist's back and tries to bite through his armor. Hans knocks out all of the zombie's teeth with an elbow strike and it flies away. Turning back, the protagonist sees that zombies have broken through the door and a whole crowd is chasing him. He closes the second door in front of them, finding himself in the same room with the bandits. After this, Hans blocks the doors by wrapping the shelves. At this moment, they start shooting at Hans with a crossbow, but he manages to dodge. Hans starts shooting back and hits the first enemy. The main character's intuition tells him that the danger has not yet passed. Another bastard appears to the right of Hans. Hans throws a gun at him and hits him right in the head. The next moment, our character jumps up and kicks the bandit, but he blocks the attack and flies to the side. The bandit does not lose consciousness and gets up to continue fighting. Hans takes out his favorite knife and prepares for the next round of their battle. The bandit asks why Hans doesn't turn into a zombie, because he was just bitten and should become infected. We are shown that Hans's shoulder is actually covered in blood, but it is from zombies. Hans knows very well what it feels like to be bitten by a zombie and knows that he is lucky this time. Hans asks the bandit how they knew about his movements. The bastard tells him that they found a radio station with the same frequency and eavesdropped on their conversations. Hans blames himself for making such a mistake and transmitting information that almost cost everyone their lives. After this, Hans asks what exactly the bandits are doing in this city. The villain tells him that they are going to join the Alliance of Rural Survivors. What he hears sends Hans into a wild rage and he loses control of himself. He strikes blow after blow at this man, leaving him no chance. He angrily beats his enemy and sits on top of him. Hans removes the bandit's mask and discovers the man's identity. In the future, he had already met him when he became the commander of the 4th Punitive Squad of the Rural Survivor Alliance. He was also known by the nickname the Bully. It now becomes clear to Hans that he has influenced events in the present, and the future is beginning to change. He recalls that in the future, the Bully's gang dealt with the local mafia themselves, after which they left and joined the Alliance of Rural Survivors. Due to Hans's disruption of their plans this time, they were delayed in the city for several days, and now he has the opportunity to deprive the Alliance of a potential recruit. Hans recalls that in the future, the Bully, after joining the Alliance, became famous for his cruelty and craving for bullying people. The Bully killed everyone in a row, sparing neither girls nor children. And now he's in the hands of our main character, who by killing him, can save thousands of lives. Hans doesn't hold back his emotions and continues to beat the bastard. The main character also remembers a situation from the future, when a bully threw one guy into a crowd of zombies and undressed his girlfriend in front of his eyes. These memories make Hans even more furious and he reaches for the knife. However, the bully does not give up and hits our character with his head. After this, he grabs Hans by the head and slams him on the floor. However, it was too late because Hans went into Avenger mode, feeling no pain. He knocks away the bully's hand and jumps to the side. The protagonist grabs the knife, but the bully starts running towards the window, realizing that he won't defeat Hans in an equal fight. The enemy jumps out the window in the hope of escaping punishment in the form of our main character. Hans thinks in his head that his mission today is to catch up and finish off the bastard. He jumps out the window after the bully. Hans sees where the bastard ran and starts chasing him. Along the way, Hans deals with all the creatures that stand in his way. Both guys run into the courtyards of residential buildings and are left alone with each other. Suddenly, a bully with a stick in his hands attacks Hans from around the corner. The bastard hits our main character on the head with a stick, but he doesn't even move from the blow. The bandit froze in horror, not understanding why Hans didn't even blink from his blow. With a deft twist of his hand, Hans grips the handle and begins to act. He stabs his bully with a knife while remaining calm and cool. We see that Hans has cut off the bastard's ear and he is screaming from the pain piercing his head. Hans slams his bully's head into the wall and he passes out unconscious. After this, Hans throws the bastard into the crowd of zombies chasing them, who have not eaten anything for a very long time. Hans watches as the monsters greedily take apart the bully's body and eat it, and after a few minutes, only memories remain of the bully. Meanwhile, Jin and the others climb onto the roof of the store and find Sari among the corpses of the attackers. She says that her life is not in danger, but Ralph still has not regained consciousness. We see that after a few hours, the doctor had already provided everyone with the necessary medical care, especially Zhonghuan. Sari asks where Hans is now, since no one has seen him for a long time. Jin talks about what happened and says that he also hasn't seen Hans for a long time and doesn't know where he might be. Sari takes out a radio and tries to call Hans, but no one answers. Next, the doctor gives Sari an injection to stop possible blood poisoning. Night falls and Sari falls asleep due to stress and her fatigue. Jin thinks that Hans might be in danger somewhere, and at the moment only he can help him. Realizing his and his fellow comrades' duty to Hans, Jin decides to go alone into the unknown and find his friend. At this moment, Hans, somewhere out there in the courtyards of residential buildings, is trying to escape alone from the bloodthirsty crowd of monsters so furiously trying to reach him. Being at a sufficient height, Hans assesses the number of monsters and understands that his current situation is very dire, and he has no plan on how to get out. We are shown how bad things are and the scale of the problem really hits us. Hans is holding onto a thin pipe along the wall, which seems like it will soon give way and treacherously break. Hans holds onto the pipe with one hand and uses the other to cut off the hands of the zombies that reach out to grab him. Hans watches the sunrise and feels calm and reflects that the second chance fate gave him was not in vain, and that he did enough to save many people, although he does not want to die. Suddenly Hans hears people screaming in a familiar voice. It was the voice of Kang Hyuk, who is the brother of Kang Kong, whose arm was cut off by Hans and who died of blood poisoning a few weeks ago. Kang Hyuk did not come alone, but with a group of young people. He left a few weeks ago to bury his brother near his parents' house, and apparently he succeeded, and also managed to find new survivors. Hans thinks that fate has given him a third chance to do as much as possible for people, and minimize the consequences of the apocalypse. We see that some time has passed and Hans begins to come to his senses. He lies in a room in the main camp and Sari lies on her knees next to him. Hans came to his senses and began to rise up in bed. This is noticed by Sari, who fell asleep while waiting for him. The girl hugs Hans and thanks God that he is still alive. She says how much she missed him and worried about him. And Hans says that he did everything he could to get back to camp. The people crowded at the entrance to Hans's chamber to look at their leader-in-chief. There is a man standing at the entrance to the room and not letting anyone in, as he wants to keep Hans calm. A girl shouts from the crowd and says that she has prepared a delicious tomorrow for Hans. The man takes the delicious food and says that he will give it to Hans, but he will not let her inside. Hans remembers what happened and that he managed to kill the bully. Hans's closest friends enter the room and greet him. Hans asks how long he slept as he feels refreshed and rested. The guys tell him that he slept for 2 days. The doctor says that Hans's condition is not in danger, and that no one died in the bandits' attack. Hans is very happy that all the camp members were saved and that everything went well. After this, Hans says that there is no time to relax, and it is time to get back to work. The people around him think what kind of monster Hans is, who even after such events cannot rest himself and let other people rest. Sari yells at Hans because he hasn't had enough rest and needs to gain strength to continue managing the camps. Hans recalls that the military camp had problems, and that it was urgent to resolve the issue of forming a camp for children and the military personnel who guarded them. However, he is reassured by the cleaner, who says that he brought the children and soldiers to their camp. He says that they are all safe now, and a third camp will be formed on the school grounds where they lived, which will belong to Hans's alliance. The man tells Hans that while he was sleeping they shared food and other resources with the soldiers and children, after which he wrote everything down, and Hans will be able to read all the information. Hans was pleasantly surprised that while he was away, the camp members were able to organize themselves and do everything right and work as a team. After this, Hans asks to call Kang Hyuk to him to ask him about how he survived while burying his brother. Kang Hyuk comes to Hans's room and tells him about the events that happened to him. He says that he buried his brother near his parents' house and met his 3 classmates there, with whom he had been friends before the apocalypse. And when he returned to the camp, they saw Hans in need of help and helped him. After talking with Kang Hyuk, Jin comes to Hans and says that he also has something to tell. Jin tells Hans that the soldiers returned with the janitor to the main camp and told him strange things about the janitor. The cleaner returning to the camp was covered in blood and had a very strange appearance. When the soldiers were asked what had happened, they fearfully told them that while returning to the main camp, they had met a small group of people on motorcycles who were members of the gang. At that moment, the cleaner, knowing what horrors that gang had committed, single-handedly dealt with those people in a fit of rage. According to the soldiers, the cleaner looked like a real devil and his condition was worrying. Hans remembers the moment when a janitor dodged his shot at the mafia building and thinks that maybe he is not an ordinary person. Next, Jin asks Hans with a serious face how he managed to dodge that arrow on the night of the gang's attack. Jin says he watched it from the sidelines, and it seemed to him that Hans had slowed down time in an incredible way. Jin doesn't understand how an ordinary person could do this and asks to explain it. However, a second later, Jin taps Hans on the shoulder and says that he understands that these two are just very clever guys and nothing more. Hans says words of gratitude, but in his head he thinks that in reality, that situation with the arrow was not simple, but something more mysterious for him. Hans calls the janitor into his room to ask how he managed to single-handedly repel the gang's attack on the military. The cleaner tells in his usual manner how he fought and defeated everyone without much effort. The cleaner says that now there are 3 camps in Hans's alliance and they need to build a clear system to manage them. Hans is thinking about how he can manage the alliance because there are so many people. Hans is developing the structure of his alliance. According to its structure, the most important one will be a search group of 16 people, which will include the best fighters, divided into 2 teams. The main camp will house 11 people permanently, the hospital camp will house 12 people, and the military camp will house 23 people. Hans realizes that there is no more time to waste and he needs to get to work. He puts on his gear and prepares for a hard day. Hans says that now the search party will move forward with him to form a 4th temporary camp, which will serve as a transit point in various situations. Sari is again unhappy that Hans has not rested and has already started hard work. Hans says that today they will visit a place that he previously kept a big secret. The guys ask what this secret place is and how far it is. To this, Hans replies that they will see him very soon. Hans then escorts the soldiers back to their camp, which is located in the school. They discuss the terms of cooperation and how the issue of interaction will be resolved. The military says that they agree to join Hans's alliance, but if the leadership of their army appears, they will return back to the military structure. Thus, the guys agree to cooperate, and the soldiers leave for the camp, taking the radio station. Several hours later, a search party in 2 trucks sets out for the location Hans is leading them to. After landing on the street, Hans tells everyone to follow him. We get a view of Hans's hideout, and we realize that he is leading his search party to his own home. Hans tells everyone to be prepared for danger, as he personally set traps in this place. In particular, Hans says that he has dug holes for zombies all over the place. We also see that Hans has stretched out a fishing line in the area, onto which he has applied glass powder. Having dealt with the zombies in the area, the guys come to the courtyard of Hans's house. Everyone sees a huge expensive house and doesn't understand what they are doing here. Hans takes everyone inside and everyone is surprised, as the house is fully equipped with everything necessary. Inside the house there are huge supplies of various food and products. Hans also shows that he has hot water. Sari is the first to take a shower and is very happy that she can finally wash her face and bring her appearance to perfect condition. Hans is embarrassed because he is also pleased that the girl can tidy herself up. At this point, Hans notices that the janitor and new military member of the squad is looking for something on the laptop. The cleaner says they want to find out what kind of girls. Hans looks at the laptop. Hans realizes that these guys are just 2 idiots. However, at that moment, Zheng Huan comes up and says that he saw Hans watching 2 young men kissing in the store. Hans is furious at such stupidity and shouts at the 3 fools. Evening comes and everyone gathers together to have dinner and discuss business. There is fried meat and a lot of food on the table. People haven't seen such delicious food for a long time and are looking forward to the time when they can eat it all. Hans says that people should not deny themselves anything and eat as much as they want. Everyone thanks Hans for such kindness. An hour later, we see everyone having a good and calm time together. The girls finally tidy themselves up, wash themselves, and do their hair. Sari finds a mobile phone and takes a video and asks Hans to say a few words on camera. Hans turns around and announces that he actually has something to say to everyone in his camp. Hans stands in the middle of the room and begins to speak, and everyone freezes in attention. Hans thanks everyone who works for the benefit of the Alliance and makes a positive contribution. Everyone starts listening closely to what Hans says. Even his closest comrades in arms listen to the main character. Hans says that this room contains the bravest and most courageous people from all 3 camps who risk their lives every day for the good of others, and they will be rewarded. One of the men in the squad asks what award Hans is talking about. The main character states that everyone who is in the search party and risks their lives will have priority for the Alliance members, eat the best food, and the rest of the people should listen to them. Hans says this is a new rule for all 3 camps in the Alliance. In his head, Hans thinks that until he knows they can all be trusted completely, he won't tell anyone about his second hideout, which is outside the city. Next, Hans is asked how he was able to prepare so well for the apocalypse, collect so much food, weapons, and master combat skills. Hans replies that he is a messenger of God, who has already lived through all these horrors and died in the future, but God brought him back to prevent the apocalypse. All people are completely surprised by what they hear. However, Hans says he was joking and everyone exhales from the tension. Hans asks Sari to show this video to all the other camps later. After this, the main character asks everyone to have a good rest, since tomorrow they will go on a mission where they must pick up ammunition from a military warehouse. Hans himself goes to sleep alone. The next morning, Hans's squad begins preparing for the mission. Hans calls all 3 camps on the radio and asks them to report to him on the situation. Hans is informed over the radio that all 3 camps are normal, and that no incidents have occurred overnight. The squad arrives at an army ammunition depot, and through binoculars sees that there are a lot of zombies there. Hans says that the number of zombies near the warehouse is too high, and it looks like there was once a zombie wave here. He says that the army unit that was based here was defeated by a wave of zombies, and apparently no one could survive in such a situation. After observing, Hans draws a diagram and asks everyone to copy it into their notebooks. Hans makes a plan where the squad will split into 3 groups, and he and the first group will go to the warehouse to get some ammo. The second group will go to the barracks to get ammo and supplies, and the third group will cover them. A few minutes later, Hans's first group enters the army warehouse, and the protagonist breaks down the door. Going inside, the soldier tells him that this warehouse is very large, since it used to contain ammunition for several army units. Hans is glad that they are so lucky, as the number of weapons here is colossal. Hans recalls that in the future he lived in earlier, he was also part of an army group until it broke up. The first group has finished getting the necessary supplies, and they are going to rest while the others finish. Hans and the soldier sit down and talk, during which Hans reveals that before the apocalypse he served in a special forces unit in the army. Then Hans is called on the radio and told that there is a problem. Hans's group arrives at the second group, which was taking ammunition from the barracks. They show him that there are a large number of zombies near the barracks, through which they will not be able to break through. Hans throws a grenade into the air. The grenade explodes on the ground, making an explosive sound. The zombies hear the sound and react to it as usual and move towards the noise. Hans says that the approach to the barracks is now clear and they can pass. Approaching the barracks, they open the doors and smell an incredible stench. Everyone is amazed at what they see inside the barracks. They see 3 soldiers who look like zombies. Coming closer, they see that these are not zombies, but simply starving soldiers. Hans asks what happened here. The soldiers say that a wave of zombies has arrived and they are trapped here. Hans wants to open the doors in the barracks and asks what is behind them. The soldier asks not to open the door because there is a toilet there. However, Hans decides to see what is behind that door and opens it. A zombie soldier attacks him. Hans stops him with a well-aimed pistol shot. Hans then points his gun at the surviving soldiers and says that he realized that they were eating their comrade out of hunger. However, Hansa is stopped by Kang Hyuk and asked not to kill the surviving soldiers. Hans says that these are no longer simple people, but cannibals, and they will not be able to live without tasting human flesh. Kang Hyuk asks to give these people a chance and still not kill them. Hans knocks down Kang Hyuk so that he won't interfere with him doing what he has planned. Kang Hyuk falls to the ground and 3 shots ring out in the air. We see that Hans did what he had to do. Kang Hyuk asks Hans why he did this. Hans replies that it was the only choice, even if it was difficult. Hans says that this world requires determination and fearlessness, and if Kang Hyuk does not want to become part of the new world, then he should leave the camp. Everyone froze when Hans spoke and did not dare interrupt him. Hans said that as a leader he bears the burden of responsibility for the lives of all the people in the camp, and that if he makes a decision, the people must trust him. Hans calls everyone to leave the barracks, as it is no longer safe to stay here. Then Hans is called over the radio by the cover group. He is informed that the zombies have begun to behave differently, moving faster and more aggressively. Hans hears the familiar roar of a monster coming from the street. He realizes that there is a wave of zombies near the warehouse and the guys are now in great danger. Hans also realizes that the zombie wave was there all this time, but was in a waiting mode until it saw Hans's search party. A wave of zombies, consisting of aggressive and fast monsters, begins to approach the barracks where Hans and his 2 groups were located. Hans shouts for everyone to retreat inside the barracks and close the doors. Everyone manages to run inside before the zombies catch up with them. However, the door does not close and the guys can hardly hold back the onslaught of several dozen zombies. Sari asks what people should do now in such danger. Hans begins to wonder which mutant is controlling this wave of zombies, and he is horrified by the fact that he remembers what sound he just heard. In his view, this wave of zombies could be controlled by one of the strongest mutants he saw in the future. The guys close the doors, but it becomes more and more difficult. Hans calls in a cover group and asks them to distract the zombie horde. The janitor accepts Hans's order and says that they will do everything possible to save their friends. The janitor, Jean, and Ralph move out according to the outlined plan. Meanwhile, a crowd of hungry zombie soldiers is breaking into the barracks. One of them breaks through. He runs straight towards Hans. With one movement of his hand, Hans stops this monster. Then more zombies start crawling into the barracks, and Hans fights against them. Hans says to put on masks for everyone immediately. Meanwhile, on the street, Jin's group begins throwing grenades into the crowd of zombies surrounding the barracks. Explosions are heard and the crowd of zombies' attention is diverted from the barracks. Hans says that face masks are necessary because after explosions there are zombie remains in the air, and you can get infected through your mouth. Hansi knocks down the doors to the barracks and tells everyone that this moment is the last chance to survive. Hans leads everyone into a fight for life against a hungry horde of zombies, eager to tear everyone apart and devour every last bone. Hans bursts into the crowd of the living dead, and with sharp movements of his blade instantly ends their existence. Confidently and with particular precision, he eliminates one furious zombie after another, leaving them no chance. The newcomers of Hans's search party watch in surprise as the main character fights. They froze and watched as Hans single-handedly exterminated dozens of furious monsters, and only one word came to mind. This word is art, and it is as art that they see the fighting style of the main character. When Hans finished his round, there was not a single zombie left around him. Only their blood was visible on the mask on his face. The rest of the squad approached Hans and awaited his further instructions. Suddenly, Hans hears a sound coming from his right and he turns his head. From the red smoke, which was colored by the remains of zombie blood flying in the air, he saw some kind of silhouette. Hans removes his mask to get a better look at the impending danger. It was another crowd of monsters from the zombie wave, which are distinguished by their special speed and characteristic red eyes. There were 100 or more of them, approaching our main characters with every second. However, the crowd of enemies is stopped by Hans's cover group, who open fire on them. It was the janitor and Jin who promised to cover the main character and his squad. Next, Hans and his squad take the weapons that were in the cart near them, and also open fire from machine guns at the zombies. Hans notices that the sniper that the military gave him in the squad shoots very well, and his percentage of hitting the target is even higher than his own. Hans thinks that this soldier will be a good member of his search party, who can be trusted after this fight. Suddenly, the newcomer that Kang Hyuk brought to the camp falls to the ground. We see that he has very severe injuries to his face, and he cannot get up. Hans, everyone be prepared for an air attack, as it looks like a special mutant has appeared. The janitor dodges another aerial attack and doesn't understand what kind of mutant can throw other objects. He sees that something like a grenade of organic origin was thrown at him. Suddenly, Hans looks up at the roof of a nearby building and sees a dark, huge silhouette. He realizes with horror that he is looking at one of the most powerful mutated zombies he has ever encountered. We see that it is a huge zombie with dark green armored skin and yellow eyes. Hans says his name in his head with fear, David. David is a special mutated zombie that leads a wave of zombies and directs them. Until now, all Hans knows about him is that he is a long-range fighter, and no one has ever survived an encounter with him. This mutant throws organic grenades that it produces from its mouth. Suddenly, David throws another grenade towards our characters. Hans shouts to all the people that they need to dodge such attacks and not try to reflect them. The cleaner continues to dodge David's attacks and waits for Hans's plan. Hans starts shooting at David with a machine gun. We are shown that regular bullets from a machine gun penetrate David's armored skin and do no harm to him. David is very angry that Hans shot him, and now our characters will have a hard time. Hans shouts for everyone to retreat to cover, while he himself tries to buy time for his comrades to retreat. Hans is left to fight alone against the terrible monster, and tries to come up with a plan in his head on how he and the others can survive this difficult battle. David continues to throw his grenades, but now he is targeting the main character. Hans dodges these attacks but realizes that he can't do this for long. Hans yells at the janitor that the two of them need to retreat to discuss their next plan of action. Meanwhile, the janitor repels attacks from the other flank of the second wave of zombies, and realizes that he really needs to retreat. David becomes very angry and is going to finish off our characters. Hans realizes that now is the time to run away and begins to move towards the weapons warehouse. The janitor joins the main character, and together they run away to the rest of the retreating people. Taking refuge in the building with the others, the characters have a few minutes to discuss their plan of action. Kang Hyuk provides medical assistance to his injured comrade. Sari asks Hans what he knows about such zombies and what they should do next. This question puts Hans in a very awkward position, and he begins to talk about what he knows about David. Hans says that David is the only type of mutant who can summon other mutants. Everyone froze in shock from what they heard and waited for an explanation from the main character. Hans says that David can summon a second type of mutant, namely Goliath, a huge giant who can destroy any fence. According to Hans, he never saw people who fought against these two mutants survive. Then Jean asks Hans a very logical question about how to defeat these mutants. To this, the main character replies that no one can defeat them, and that anyone who intends to fight them will only face death. Hans says that due to the wave of zombies and the appearance of two special mutants at the same time, they will not have enough people to repel their attacks and survive. Then Jin asks a second, no less logical question to Hans, namely, how he himself managed to survive if he had seen them before. At this, Hans sadly lowers his head and recalls the events of the past. He says that the only reason he survived the one time he met this mutant is because he ran away from him. Hans then remembers in his head how in the future his comrade taught him martial arts and subsequently stayed to fight against such a mutant. However, as expected, his friend was bitten by a zombie and turned into a monster himself, which is why no one has a single chance to survive in such a situation. After his thoughts, Hans asks if there are any people among the people who would risk their lives to give the others time to escape. However, no one agrees to risk their life to save others. Then Hans calls his best fighters and says that they will try to defeat David and Goliath, but they can all die today. Hans says that Jean will go with him and they work together to take on David. After this, Hans divides the rest of the people into several groups. He tells the sniper soldier and the cleaner to attack Goliath, who should appear soon. He tells Kang Hyuk and his friends to provide cover for the previous two groups from the regular zombies. The main character tasked everyone else with supplying ammunition and providing assistance to those people who would be injured during the battle. Hans warns Jin that they will both likely die fighting David, but other people may survive. Jin replies that he will follow Hans even if they both die at the end of their mission. Meanwhile, David is waiting for his victims, whom he wants to continue hunting. We are shown a door handle which Hans opens and everyone freezes, as at that moment an incredible battle is about to begin. The door opens and a huge crowd of bloodthirsty, furious zombies runs into the room, wanting to tear our characters to pieces. Hans comes face to face with the danger looming over them, and realizes that now is truly the most dangerous moment of his life. They start shooting at the crowd of zombies, opening fire on them from all the machine guns that were here in the warehouse. Hans and the others are trying to buy enough time for the pushback group to start acting. Hans orders the operation to exit the warehouse to begin. We see that people, on the instructions of the main character, have built special shields to push out the zombies and leave the building. Jin's group begins to push the crowd of zombies out and open a path to the exit. Hans sees that his plan is starting to work and people are able to leave the building to fight in the open. After a few minutes, almost everyone comes out of the warehouse and begins to push the crowd of zombies further and further away, giving them room to maneuver. Hans understands that his plan is working for now, but in just a few minutes he will have to fight against one of the most powerful mutants on Earth. We see that David has been waiting on the roof all this time in the hope that he will be able to hunt people. A crowd of zombies approaches our characters and is about to attack them. However, they are eliminated by an explosion from a grenade thrown by the cover group. By this time, the cleaner and the others had managed to take their positions and cover Hans. They then clear their position of zombies to allow Hans to fight. The cleaner shouts to Hans that now he can stop being distracted by simple zombies and focus on destroying the most important thing. The janitor understands that this will be an incredibly difficult mission, since everyone is facing such a threat for the first time in their lives. Suddenly, a zombie flies towards the cleaner and we realize that the very Goliath that Hans was talking about has appeared. The cleaner looks towards the fence and thinks that today is going to be a really tough day. He sees a huge red monster that attacks zombies and stands behind the fence of a military warehouse. The janitor can't wait to see this mutant up close, so he starts running towards him. The cleaning team is surprised by this decision, because they themselves are very scared. The cleaner jumps towards a concrete wall and pushes off the ground with great force. Like a ninja, he runs along the wall because he needs to climb to the highest point. He grabs the edge of the wall and climbs up. Everyone is shocked at how the cleaner just climbed over a 10-meter wall and was able to get to the top. Having climbed to the top, the cleaner realizes what huge problems they have, and thinks that they need to test Goliath's strength. He takes a hand grenade and is about to throw it into this crowd of monsters. An explosion and everything is plunged into fog and the remains of zombies. When the fog clears, the cleaner is glad that Goliath is not as strong as David, and that he can still be defeated. We see that Goliath's head is damaged due to the explosion, but he's still able to fight. Suddenly, the janitor is upset that he saw something behind Goliath. It turns out that Goliath is not alone in the crowd of zombies, as there are about 5 more of the same huge monsters with him. The janitor realizes that he needs to buy as much time as possible for Hans to defeat his most powerful enemy. He starts shooting at the wounded Goliath in the hopes of finishing him off at least. At that moment, another zombie thrown by Goliath flies towards him. The janitor dodges him and thinks that this fight is unfair and that he has the most difficult mission as usual. The cleaner calls the sniper to come up to his wall. The sniper climbs up the rope, taking his favorite rifle with him. The soldier sees that the mission will indeed be very difficult, since the slightest mistake could cause both of them to die. The janitor asks the sniper to shoot Goliath's legs while he provides protection to the soldier. We see that the sniper really shoots very accurately and manages to wound Goliath. However, another abandoned zombie flies towards the sniper, and the soldier thinks that it is the end for both of them. The cleaner grabs a flying zombie in midair and deftly turns it in the other direction. He throws it back at Goliath, telling him to choke on the piece of shit. The sniper is shocked by how brave and dexterous the cleaner turned out to be, and understands that it was not in vain that Hans trusted him. The janitor says he will protect the sniper and ensure that he can shoot Goliath. Meanwhile, Sari's group provides ammunition and weapons to those who are pushing back the zombies outside. According to Hans's instructions, they must quickly pass on new ammunition so that the men can ensure that he can fight David. Sari says that it is getting very hot in the room and starts to undress. All the guys start looking at Sari because she has a very beautiful figure. Sari says that if they don't work well and stare at her, she will tell Hans everything. People quickly get to work because they are afraid of Hans. Next, we are shown the work of a group engaged in containing a crowd of zombies. Suddenly, one of them runs out of ammo and needs to go to the cart for more. He comes to the cart with cartridges, but there is no one near it. He also notices that the wire with which the man wounded in the face was tied is torn. Suddenly, an infected monster jumps on him from above, as he had been hiding nearby all this time. Sari hears suspicious sounds outside and goes to check it out. We are shown that the guy has been captured and they are already starting to eat him. Sari runs out into the street and sees this picture and understands that she needs to act. She kills the mutant, but it is too late and he manages to bite the guy. The guy begins to transform into a new monster, since under the conditions of a zombie wave, the transformation occurs in a matter of minutes. The sound of a gunshot is heard in the air and we see drops of blood. The transforming guy's hand falls to the ground dead. We are shown Sari, who took it upon herself to stop the boy's suffering and prevent him from turning into a monster. At this time, Hans and Jean fight against David together using improvised means. David fights from a distance and does not allow anyone to get closer to him. Our guys hid behind a truck and are waiting in this position. They come up with a plan where Jean will distract David while Hans plants a powerful anti-tank bomb. Another organic grenade flies towards our characters. Jin reflects this attack with his shield, but it is destroyed. All that remains for Jean is to dodge the attacks of the special mutant and buy time for Hans. We are shown a powerful anti-tank bomb that is glued to the food cabinets. Hans set a special trap inside the building in order to lure a special mutant, David, into it. He calls Jean on the radio and says that he has managed to get ready, and now they need to act according to the plan. We see that these bombs are activated by pressing special mechanisms. Jin throws a hand grenade to create an explosion and distract David so that Hans can escape the building unnoticed. The main character leaves the building unnoticed and will now fight on his own. He tries to see through the smoke where David is gone, but he doesn't see him. At this moment, another organic bomb flies towards Hans. Hans dodges her and runs to the side. Hans realizes that David is not an ordinary zombie, and that he can think through his attacks and combat tactics. David prepares another organic grenade to throw at Hans. However, at that very moment, a bullet from a machine gun hits his mouth. The color of his eyes changes to orange and the monster becomes enraged. It was Hans who shot him in the mouth, and now he thinks that most likely David was hit by such a stupid shot for the first time in his stupid life. David becomes enraged and is going to attack our main character and take revenge on him. Hans has a premonition that now he needs to prepare for close combat with this monster. David jumps into the air and approaches Hans to attack him in close combat. Hans dodges this attack, which he had foreseen. However, while dodging the monster's attack, Hans manages to leave a hand fragmentation grenade in its place. David notices that there is a hand grenade left in the place where Hans ran away from, but it is too late for him. There is an explosion, and the monster's armored body is crushed by the powerful charge of the grenade. At that moment, Hans runs out of the smoke, realizing that he has 1 second to deliver his final blow. The monster froze from the damage and stood in one place, unable to move. Hans jumps out of the smoke and is about to shoot him in the head. To Hans's surprise, David has shrunk significantly in size after the explosion, but he manages to point the barrel of his machine gun at the monster's mouth. Hans pulls the trigger in hopes of ending this monster once and for all. However, David bites through Hans's machine gun with his teeth, preventing him from firing. Hans's machine gun explodes in his hands, and now he is left without a weapon. Immediately after this, David strikes back at Hans and pushes him away. Hans kicks the mutated monster's body in hopes of weakening it. However, Hans's foot feels that David's body feels like metal, and he won't be able to defeat him in close combat. David starts attacking Hans and he retreats. There is a truly incredible battle to the death between these two guys. The monster's eyes become increasingly red, indicating that he's becoming even more angry. Suddenly, Hans hears a shot near him and the falling zombie. It was Jin, covering his friend with a machine gun. The zombie's body falls right next to Hans and he realizes that Jin just saved him. David doesn't miss the opportunity and attacks Hans, who is distracted at that moment. Hans manages to block the attack with his knives. The monster pushes Hans against the wall, preventing our hero from taking a favorable position and calculating his next move. Hans realizes with horror how much weaker he is than David, and understands that in close combat he will die within a few minutes. We are shown Jin's hand lifting a huge sledgehammer from the ground. David is hit in the head with a sledgehammer, which Jin delivered with all his strength. Despite the fact that Jin is very strong and muscular, he was unable to even move this monster. David is not interested in the Jin who hit him, and he decides to deal with him with one blow. David hits Jin with his hand and he flies back tens of meters from the blow. We see that Jin receives very heavy damage from the blow. At the same time, he flies far back and falls into some building. Jin is unable to move due to pain and injuries. Half of the zombies crawl towards him, still wanting human flesh. Jin notices this zombie, but it is too late for him. The zombie bites Jin on his left arm and he is unable to dodge it. Hans is worried about Jin, but he can't help him because the distance is too great and he continues to fight with David. We are shown that the zombie bit off 2 fingers on Jin's hand. David launches his next blow at Hans, but he manages to dodge it. Hans realizes that if he doesn't defeat this monster, all members of his camp will die today. We are shown a confrontation between two of the strongest representatives of their species, and a real fight to the death. The monster begins to breathe deeply and angrily, and we understand that he is going to finish off Hans because he is tired of playing with him. Hans senses danger and decides to dodge and distract this monster. David swings both hands at Hans and attacks him. Hans jumps to the side and has the opportunity to carry out his plan. He runs inside the building where he had recently prepared a surprise for David. The monster breaks down walls and runs after the main character, destroying everything in its path. At this time, Jin dealt with the zombie that attacked him. Jin realizes that if he doesn't do something now, in a few minutes he will turn into a zombie. Meanwhile, Hans runs around the room and tries to hide from David. David finds him and proceeds to destroy the entire building around him. Hans notices the detonator he hid, and realizes that this is his last chance to fix the situation. Hans jumps on the detonator in the hopes of pressing it in time and setting off the bomb. We see that at this moment David is right next to the cabinets on which Hans had attached the bomb a few minutes ago. Hans reaches for the detonator and presses it. An explosion of enormous force resounded in the air and was supposed to finish off the monster once and for all. However, we see David's shining eyes in the cloud of smoke and understand that he is not dead. At the last moment, David notices the restless Hans, who by this time was already standing opposite him. With a sharp movement of his hand, Hans pierces David's right eye, depriving him of the ability to see with that eye. At the same time, Hans throws a hand grenade into his mouth. Afterwards, Hans kicks the monster, pushing it away from him. The explosion causes the monster's body to swell, and it seems that he is about to receive fatal damage. Just now, Hans acted without a clear plan, solely on his reactions and fighting instincts. At this time, we are shown the medications and everything necessary for the amputation. We see Jin about to amputate his arm to prevent further infection. He realizes that several minutes have passed and he will have to cut off the entire hand. Jin feels very sorry for his hand, but he understands that this is the only way to remain human in this situation. A sharp cry of pain is heard near the truck in which Jin was sitting, and we realize that he has cut off his own hand. Meanwhile, we are shown a monster that has received very serious injuries, but is still conscious. Hans realizes that he must now put an end to this battle. He takes another fragmentation grenade and is about to repeat his move. However, at this moment the monster's eye lights up bright red, and we realize that he has entered the final stage of his rage. In half a second, David closes the distance between himself and Hans, and the latter doesn't even have time to follow him. The next moment, David appears behind the main character and Hans doesn't even have time to react. David tears off a piece of Hans's shoulder in the hopes of infecting the main character and thus ending his life. Hans does not lose his composure and grabs a hand grenade. He puts a grenade into David's mouth. After this, Hans, with the last of his strength, hits David with an uppercut to his head. From Hans's strong blow, David, already weakened and diminished, is lifted into the air. The explosion of a fragmentation grenade tears David's body into small pieces. Hans stands in one place, covered in a green haze from the explosion. He smiles because he is the first man on Earth to defeat David and kill him. Realizing that the zombie wave will now end and his people are safe, Hans collapses. He lies on the floor and cannot get up because he is too tired after the battle. Hans thinks that in a few minutes he will turn into a mutant, and hopes that his comrades have enough strength to kill him. As Hans accepts his death, he reflects on what he has done for people and whether he did the right thing. He remembers the faces of his close comrades and understands that he did not die in vain and saved their lives. If he hadn't sacrificed himself, everyone else would have died, Hans thought, and his body weakened and his mind faded. Before Hans's eyes appeared a beautiful girl with white skin and white hair, who stretched out her hands towards our main character. Hans opened his eyes, which were not infected with the virus, and we understand that he regained consciousness. Hans rose in the same room where he fell dead. His right shoulder still hurt as much as before, which is why Hans remembers the events that happened in a few seconds. He looks at the time and sees that more than 2 hours have passed since he passed out. Hans goes to the mirror and examines his body for infected and rotten areas. He realizes that he has not turned into a zombie, and that he does not have any infection in his body. Hans puts on his battlesuit and ponders how he managed to survive. He also remembers the moment when he was bitten by a zombie during a previous fight with a gang of bastards, and he also did not get infected. Hans thinks he has some kind of immunity to the virus and heads to the car where he last saw Jin. In the car, he finds bloody equipment and bandages. Inside the truck, he finds an unconscious Jin, who cut off his own hand and subsequently bandaged it. Hans is surprised by Jin's determination, and understands that this man is incredibly strong in spirit since he was able to solve the problem of infection on his own. Meanwhile, the rest of the group deals with the zombie corpses. We see that the wave of zombies weakened after David's defeat, and people easily dealt with them. Hans brings Jin to the others to find out how they are doing, and to provide medical assistance to his comrade. Hans is informed that all zombies have been eliminated, and the territory of the military warehouse has been completely cleared. The main character calls the janitor on the radio and asks how they dealt with Goliath. The cleaner replies that it was a very difficult task, but thanks to Hans's instructions and clear, well-coordinated work, they succeeded. We are shown how huge the Goliath was that the cleaning group fought. Then Hans calls John Huang on the radio to bring the doctor as quickly as possible. Hans explains to John Huang that there is a motorcycle in his hideout, which he must use to deliver the doctor as quickly as possible. Night falls and we see that the entire group has reached Hans's hideout. All tired people sleep on the floor and replenish their strength. We are shown syringes and drained blood, and we understand that Hans's comrades shared their blood with Jin so that he could recover. We are shown Jin with his arm amputated and that he is still alive and conscious. The doctor tells Hans that thanks to the speed with which he was brought here on a motorcycle, and the people who shared their blood with him, Jin will recover. Hans is also bandaged as he suffered significant injuries after the battle with David. He comes to the room where they have stored the received cartridges and weapons, and understands that this is enough. Enough to counter any of the world's threats in the apocalypse. These supplies should also be enough to counter the Sole Survivors Alliance. Hans removes the bandage and looks at his wound and sees that it is almost healed. Hans cannot yet explain even to himself why he did not become a zombie, and decides that he will not tell anyone anything about what happened and will keep it a secret. The morning comes a few days after the events described. Sari wakes up and we see that she clearly lacks sleep and wants to sleep much more. Also, a cleaner wakes up next to her and also complains about lack of sleep. Sari is surprised that the cleaner sleeps in the same room with her, since when she went to bed he was not in the room, to which the cleaner replies that he came later because he likes this room. We see that Hans's search party is about to move to a new camp, which will be a staging area for the elite search party. We see that the camp is a multi-story, expensive and stylish building. Everyone was very pleasantly surprised at what nice apartments Hans offered as a camp. The building has over 10 rooms where girls and boys can live, as well as storage rooms and water. Hans says that in this camp men will live 4 to a room, and girls 3 to a room. Hans himself will live separately in his own room. Evening comes and Hans returns to his hideout to finish the move. While Hans was discussing the move with people, a doctor approached him and said that Jean had regained consciousness. Hans immediately ran to Jin's room because he was worried about his life. Having opened the doors, Hans calmed down, because now his comrade's life was not in danger. Jin was sitting on his bed, fully conscious and looking better. Hans asked how Jin was doing and how he was feeling. Jin replied that he felt fine and wanted a rematch of the battle with that huge monster. Hans says that he is sorry that Jin lost his arm in that difficult fight. The main character also takes responsibility for what happened. Jin replies that he holds no grudge against Hans, and that he will continue to follow him, as everyone owes their lives to our main character. Jin says that although he now has one arm missing, he has already figured out how to use it to his advantage. A doctor comes into the room with some drawings in his hands. The thing is that the doctor has already started developing a special prosthesis for Jean, and now he is told about it. Jin says that he doesn't need a regular prosthesis, he just needs a combat prosthesis. The doctor replies that it will be very difficult to manufacture, and that it will take several months of training for Jean before he can return to the search party. The doctor says that a combat prosthesis will interfere with Jin's daily tasks, and that it is better to abandon the idea. Hans orders the doctor to design the combat prosthesis exactly the way Jin wants it, because he deserves it. The doctor agrees and understands that he has a lot of work ahead of him. 2 months pass after the events just described. We see 2 people running down the street. They run into the created barrier and stop. The janitor tells the 2 people in the special device to put down their weapons and come forward to be examined and questioned. However, the 2 strangers say that they are not going to leave their weapons here and will still do as they please. The cleaner replies that if they do not obey his orders, they will both die. At this, one of the guys takes out a gun and starts shooting at the cleaner, and the second stranger starts climbing onto the fence. Suddenly, the sound of a sniper rifle shot is heard in the air, and one of the strangers falls dead. We see that the second stranger is also already under the sights of a sniper rifle, but he is not going to give up and opens return fire with his pistol. A second shot is heard in the air, and the sniper reports a precise hit on target for the second time. We see that this is a member of Hans's search party, who as expected has become a real sniper and a valuable member of the group. He has a specially equipped long-range sniper rifle that Hans got for him a few weeks ago. Then a motorcycle with 2 people on it approaches the cleaner. We see that it is Seri and Zhonghuan who have arrived, saying that there are less than 2 hours left until the general meeting of the camp leaders. Next, we are shown the eastern border of the Hans Camp Alliance, and that the border expansion is currently taking place there. Hans also takes an active part in the battle and expansion of territory. He had just completed another mission to clear the area of the remaining zombies. We are told that Hans's alliance now consists of 5 camps, namely a camp at the hospital, a camp at the school with the military, a camp in the store, a camp for the search party, and a new camp in the northern part of the city. A motorcycle with familiar characters also arrives to see Hans. Seri is unhappy that Hans is not answering her on the radio and has forgotten about the scheduled meeting again. Zhonghuan greets Hans rather reservedly and coldly. The main character thinks that Zhonghuan still holds a grudge against him because Hans appointed the janitor as the head of the first reconnaissance squad of the search party, and appointed Kang Hyuk as the head of the second reconnaissance squad. Suddenly, one zombie breaks through the barrier and runs towards our characters. He quickly approaches Hans's back, who notices him quite late due to him being in the middle of talking to his comrades. At this moment, a huge, strong blade crashes into the zombie's head. We see the facial features of a familiar character who says that Hans is losing his fighting skills due to paperwork. Our heroes were delighted when they saw who had just killed the zombie. It was Jin, who now had a metal combat prosthesis with a blade instead of his left hand. Jin says he's still getting used to the prosthesis, but he really likes it. Next, we are shown the meeting place of the 5 camp leaders, who have gathered to hold a planning council. Hans walks down a long corridor and we see guards and understand that over the past 2 months his alliance has developed a lot. Hans enters the room where the next meeting of the leaders will take place. Everyone got up from their chairs when Hans entered the room. Our main character commands everyone to take their places. He sits down on the chair himself and thanks everyone for waiting. Hans declares the next meeting open and suggests starting with the pressing issues of the alliance's life. The camp leader at the store says that there are documents on Hans's desk, according to which they have prepared questions that require Hans to resolve. Hans starts reading, and the first question on the document is about renaming Hans's camp alliance. As the camp leader explains to Hans in the store, someone needs to come up with a quality and interesting name for the alliance, so that they won't be embarrassed to tell it to newly discovered survivors. Hans makes an instant decision and orders all 5 camps to collect proposals for a name for the alliance. As a reward for whoever comes up with the best name, Hans says he will give away a cool beer that he recently discovered with his search party. Everyone was very pleasantly surprised by this decision, because the beer he discovered was very rare and incredibly tasty. Hans appoints the cleaner, who is now the head of the first reconnaissance detachment of Hans's search party, to be responsible for resolving this issue. Hans is then troubled by the next issue brought up for discussion. Namely, the head of the hospital camp proposes to allow people to move freely between camps in a safe area. The head of the hospital camp explains this by saying that the area between the 5 camps has long been cleared of zombies, and people will really like it if they can freely walk around the city. However, Hans replies that the head of the hospital camp forgets about such a phenomenon as a zombie wave, which occurs when more than 20 people gather in one place. Tom, the head of the hospital camp, says that it is not known for certain what exactly causes the phenomenon known as the zombie wave, and that it is possible to take risks in order to give people freedom of movement. Hans replies that he is the one making all the decisions in this council based on his experience, and Tom has never fought a wave of zombies, so he does not know what he is talking about. After which Hans warns Tom not to argue with him anymore. Tom lowers his head and realizes that he must agree with Hans and gives in. Hans warns Tom that if he argues with him again, he will remove him from his position as camp commander. After these words, the head of the northern camp begins to worry greatly and tremble with fear. He remembers how Hans once caught the previous head of the northern camp stealing food. Having caught him at the crime scene, Hans killed him. Hans then proceeds to listen to the following questions. The head of the military camp says that they are running out of drinking water, and that this problem needs to be solved. Hans replies that after the expansion work is completed, they will extract water from a nearby reservoir. Until that happens, all other camps must share drinking water with them. Everyone is surprised by this decision and does not understand where Hans is going to get water from. To this, Hans replies that there is a river with silvery water near their camps, and that if they work together, they will be able to build a mechanism that will supply this water to all the camps. Next, Hans is asked about the need to distribute food supplies to all camps in equal proportions. Hans understands that at the moment almost all food products are concentrated in one place. It is in the camp that the food and grocery warehouse is located, and Hans has complete personal control over the food supply. He understands that if the heads of the camps gain independence from each other, then real hostility will begin. Therefore, Hans replies that there will be no distribution of food, and that everything will remain as before. He says that by receiving food, the camp leaders will gain independence from Hans, and he cannot allow this. Hans states that he is their only hope for survival, and all power will belong to him alone without reservations, including because none of the leaders risk their lives like he does. Therefore, they will follow his orders. Night falls and we are shown the camp of Hans's search party, which is based in a cool, stylish building. We see that Hans is actually doing paperwork as the head of the entire alliance. The janitor takes Hans's documents and starts laughing at the protagonist's notes. According to the cleaner, Hans began to pay too much attention to paperwork and completely forgot who he really was. The janitor says that Hans needs to stop tolerating the camp leader's ridiculous behavior and just take them along on the mission. Comrade Hansa argues for this proposal by saying that the other heads of alliances are sitting in their offices and have forgotten what real danger is, and they need to be reminded of this. Hans thinks that the cleaner's proposal is quite interesting, and he should think about it and perhaps do so. Then the janitor turns on the radio and shows Hans that he recently heard an ad from some girls. The janitor turns on the recording of this announcement, and we hear the voice of a girl who says that the girls have founded a special camp to help women, and they call on everyone to come to a place near the station, while having a minimum amount of weapons and a white flag with them. Hans begins to remember the familiar voice and wonder if this announcement is a decoy, or if it is really as the voice says. Suddenly Hans remembers the voice from the radio and the events during which he heard it. It was the girl Jung-mi, with whom Hans worked before the apocalypse, and whom the main character helped at the beginning of our story. Hans is amazed that this young girl managed to survive in such terrible conditions. The cleaner asks Hans what they will do next and whether they will respond to this announcement. Hans replies that he will not risk the lives of his men to test a possible trap and bait. After this, Hans clearly shows the cleaner the place where the radio invites him to come, and says that going there would be tantamount to suicide. Hans then asks the janitor to help him sort out the remaining documents. Morning comes and we see a camp near the store. Seri and Zhonghwan arrive there and greet the local security. They bring fresh news from the other camps to the residents of this camp, which is now printed in a small newspaper. Residents always look forward to news and love to read about new and exciting events. Next, Seri and Zhonghwan head to the northern camp to also deliver newspapers. We see that the northern camp, which was the last to join Hans's alliance, is still poorly equipped. Seri gives newspapers to its residents, but one girl stops her. This girl says that she has some bad news for Seri, and she needs the help of the alliance leadership. We are then shown that a few hours later, Hans holds an emergency meeting with his elite search party, where he announces that the reconnaissance team led by Kang Hyuk has been ambushed. Jin asks how this happened and how Hans managed to find out about it. Hans says that a few hours ago, 2 people from Kang Hyuk's squad ran into the camp and told about the squad. According to the 2 guys, they were looking for survivors with Kang Hyuk and found a new religious camp, but the others were captured, and the 2 of them managed to escape. Jin is nervous, as the 2 escapees could have been followed, and now the enemies will find out where Hans's camp is based. To this, Hans replies that he and other people searched the area and found no evidence of surveillance on the escaped alliance members. Now Jin asks what to do in such a situation. The main character explains that their enemies are now an unusual gang of robbers, but rabid fanatics, and the leader of their gang is called the Messiah. Everyone is surprised by such a name of the leader and understands that most likely this time their enemies are real madmen. The cleaner does not understand the general surprise and asks why Hans is so excited. To this, the main character replies that groups of survivors who form a religious camp tend to become a very powerful negative community. He says that such people, blindly following their master, will kill and die for him, so it is very difficult to fight against them. The janitor then asks if Hans has a plan to free the captured Kang Hyuk and the others. To this, our main character replies that we need to assemble the entire composition of his elite search group. Hans says that they will free their comrades at any cost, and after that they will cruelly punish their offenders. Hans then suggests starting the mission and asks if anyone has any questions. To this, Seri raises her hand and says that they have a problem. Seri states that in the morning a girl living in the northern camp told her about a very delicate issue. According to the girl, one of the members of Hans's search party pestered her and insisted on intimate relations in exchange for food. Seri says that this is a very serious case that requires Hans's attention. The main character is very angry and thinks that not a single day can pass peacefully in his alliance. Hans is furious at this news, and the first thing he wants to do is punish the offender. However, then he remembers that the guy that girl was talking about is, in his opinion, a normal man. He recalls that the guy trained hard for months to get into Hans's squad and showed real courage and integrity. Hans says he will solve this problem, but for now we can't be sure that the girl is not deceiving them. After this, Hansa's elite search party moves to the place where Kang Hyuk and his party were captured. One of the squad members asks Hans why they are going this way. To this, Hans replies that by going along this road they will remain unnoticed by enemy reconnaissance. Hans looks around the area and notices something. A cleaner comes up to him. A truly terrifying picture opens up for the two of them, namely a crowd of thousands of zombies who used to be ordinary people and lived in this city. Hans looks down silently and muses that it will take years to clear this city of monsters. Meanwhile, we are shown Kang Hyuk, who is being held captive. We see that 3 more people from his squad are captured along with him. An incredibly terrifying face approaches Hyuk and is ready to tear him to pieces. We see that the people who captured Kang Hyuk's squad tied zombies near them so that the people could not escape. Kang Hyuk faces the danger and hopes that Hans will save them this time too. Hans then recalls how they were captured. Namely, they heard the sounds of prayer coming from the church. When they approached her, a monk opened the door for them. The monk said that this place was holy, and Kang Hyuk's squad could enter it and be purified. People started laughing at this, but Kang Hyuk decided to go inside and check. The monk invited everyone inside and told them to leave their weapons at the entrance, as this was a holy place. Next, our characters were fed delicious food. On the surface, this camp seemed ordinary and there were happy people in it. However, Kang Hyuk had a bad feeling, and he understood that not everything was so smooth here. Next, Kang Hyuk asked the monk where people who undergo initiation go and where they are located. At this, the monk laughed and became more like some kind of devil. He said that all who undergo enlightenment go to heaven and no longer live in this world. At this moment, the head of this camp, whose name is Messiah, enters the church. Everyone kneels before him and begins to pray. The Messiah takes his place in the church hall. He tells everyone to sit down, and now another initiation ceremony will take place. The Messiah says that 2 girls have entered the camp and will soon finish their education. Kang Hyuk decides to explore the entire church building and asks how to get to the toilet. Next, Kang Hyuk begins to inspect the church building and sees that the passage to the upper floors is closed and there are guards there. Kang Hyuk decides to use the elevator tunnel. He crawls to the top floor to get all the answers he is looking for. Having climbed to the top floor, Kang Hyuk remains unnoticed. Suddenly, he heard some strange sound coming from the street. He looked out the window and saw zombies outside eating a man. Kang Hyuk realized that someone had just been thrown out of the church window. He understands which room this could have been done from and is going to go there. Entering the room, he saw 2 men who were going to play with a young and beautiful girl. The men said that they had not had such a slender and attractive girl for a long time, and now they would play with her all day long. Kang Hyuk grabbed the first bat he could find and knocked out both men. Meanwhile, Hans burned to the bones the entire crowd of zombies that was below the bridge. Now we are shown again Kang Hyuk, who is being held captive by a religious sect. He is greeted by the leader of this sect, nicknamed the Messiah, and he asks where Kang Hyuk's camp is and how many girls are there. Hyuk spits in the face of this scoundrel and says that he will not say a word about his camp. The Messiah wipes away Hyuk's drool and says that in that case, he has prepared a little surprise for him. Namely, he approached the girl and told Hyuk that if he didn't tell him anything, he would undress this girl in front of his eyes and hurt her. Hyuk says that the Messiah is actually just a common bastard and pervert, and that he will definitely be punished. To this, the head of the sect answers him that no one can harm him, not even the stupid and small camp of Hyuk. At that moment, the Messiah was approached by his security guard, who said that their church had just been attacked. The guard explained that they did not have time to see how many people were there and what weapons they had. The Messiah was very surprised at how quickly the Hyuk camp members found him. He tells Hyuk to wait for him here, because now he will go and easily deal with the people who attacked him. Walking down the corridor, the Messiah sees that many of his people died during the attack on the church. The head of the sect understands that he has 4 hostages, and that now he will first kill the attackers and then finish off the captives. The Messiah opens the doors to the church hall. A terrible picture appears before him. All his subordinates are on their knees with their hands behind their backs. His guards were killed and their weapons taken. The Messiah does not understand who and how could do this to his people in such a short time. The silence in the hall was broken by a clear question from a man in armor with red hair, who asked which of these people was the real Messiah. The sect leader ordered Hansu and his men to lay down their arms or he would kill Kang Hyuk. A shot was fired and the sect leader's guard, who had pointed a gun at Kang Hyuk, fell dead. The Messiah didn't even have time to come to his senses before his hostage was left without control. In front of him stood a young man with red hair, and a light smoke was coming out of his pistol from the shot he had just fired. The Messiah thought that at this moment he should retreat and run away and hide. The head of the sect begins to run away, but he is stopped by 2 precise shots from a pistol. Hans tells the rest of the men to free Hyuk and check the remaining rooms. The main character also reproaches Kang Hyuk for his frivolity in putting the camp at risk by not reporting to him about the discovery of a new camp. Kang Hyuk realizes his mistake and says that he will accept any punishment. Now Hans's attention is drawn to the head of a religious sect. The first thing Hans asks him is why he is called the Messiah. To this, the madman replies that he is a messenger of God, and he is invulnerable. Hans grabs the head of the sect by the clothes and says that now he will personally check how invulnerable he is. The head of the sect raises his hand and shows Hans that it is covered in scars. Hans is surprised by this, and thinks in his head that perhaps the Messiah has the same gift of healing as he does. The main character rips off the clothes of the Messiah and exposes his body. All the parishioners froze and began to pray at what they saw. Before us stands the Messiah, covered in scars and cuts, and we see that they have all healed on his body. All the sect members present fell to their knees and began to say prayers. Hans remains calm and unsurprised, asking if the Messiah is immune to zombie healing. The head of the sect replies that he is a god and is immune to any bites and damage. Hans abruptly grabs the hand of the Messiah, who has already tired him out with his pompous speeches. In cold blood and without hesitation, Hans cuts off several fingers on the hand of the head of this religious sect. Everyone screams in horror at this, because up until this moment they considered the Messiah invulnerable. The Messiah screams in pain and begins to cry. Hans says that now he will ask the Messiah questions, and if he does not answer them, the main character will beat him. The Messiah shouts that he must be spoken to with great respect because he is God. Hans punches Messiah in the face and asks where the rest of Kang Hyuk's comrades are. The Messiah says that he is in great pain, and before he can answer, Hans must promise that he will not kill him. Hans says that he will not kill the Messiah if he cooperates. Hans hits Messiah again because he didn't answer his question about where his people are. Hans says that the Messiah is just a pathetic bastard and a swindler who deceived people, and now it's time to pay for his sins. The Messiah tells Hans that his men are hidden in a storage room a few floors up the stairs. Hans orders Jung Hwan to find and free his comrades. Jung Hwan sets out to find the remaining 3 people who were held captive by the Messiah. Next, the main character asks the head of the sect what he was going to do if Hans had not come to his church. The head of the sect tells him that they would sneak into Hans's camps and steal girls and food. Hans beats the stupid sect leader for such words, and says that he has no idea who he is dealing with, and how powerful the alliance of camps Hans has. The main character asks what the Messiah did before the apocalypse. The Messiah admits that before the zombie apocalypse he was in prison, and serving a sentence for fraud on an especially large scale. Hans tells the head of the sect that he is just a piece of shit and a liar to him. All the people heard the confession of the head of the sect that he is a fraud and a deceiver, and understands that they wasted their time praying with him. Hans says that now is the time to take responsibility for your actions. A cleaner enters the room carrying 1 live zombie. Hans is asked what he's going to do with all this now. The head of the sect begs not to kill him and says that Hans promised it. Hans replies that he will not kill the head of the sect with his own hands, but will only check if the Messiah is immune to zombie bites. The next moment, Hans releases the zombie and then pounces and bites the head of the sect. After this, Hans kills the zombie and leaves the head of the sect lying on the floor. Hans orders the janitor to post guards around the body of the cult leader and watch to see if he turns into a zombie. Hans then says that we need to think about what to do with the members of this religious sect taken hostage. He understands that most of the people in this sect are women who are of no particular value to him. Hans orders to search the entire church building, find the necessary resources, food, weapons, and bring them to the main hall. After this, Hans says that he will kill all the people who are in the religious sect. Kang Hyuk asks not to do this as these are just deceived people. He says that Hans should pardon them and spare them and not kill them. Hans tells Hyuk that for putting the people of the Alliance at risk, he is removing him from his position as head of the 2nd Reconnaissance Squad. Hyuk accepts this punishment but asks Hans to spare the women. He says that they can be useful to the Alliance and that other solutions to this problem need to be found. The girls are terrified and they are very scared because they see that Hans is a very serious and determined person and they might die soon. Hans ponders what to do in this situation, because he cannot take girls into the Alliance, because in this way he will put the rest of the people at risk. The main character thinks that he would not kill innocent people, and now he is just intimidating them and testing how they will behave. Hans also remembers how in the future, Kang Hyuk's brother died, sacrificing himself for the sake of the others. Hans says out loud Kang Kong's words, "Live and help others survive." Kang Hyuk asks what Hans just talked about. Hans's answer surprises him very much. The main character said that the words "live and help others survive" belong to Kang Hyuk's brother, and he values these words very much. So he will spare the girls and think about what to do with them. Seri knew that Hans would not kill the prisoners and understood that he was simply intimidating them. Hans orders the prisoners to be searched and all weapons taken away. But before that, he will ask them a few questions. He asks if there are any useful workers among the people, doctors, military personnel, teachers, or engineers. Hans says to raise your hand if you are any of the above. Suddenly, one person raises his hand and stands up. He says that before the apocalypse, he was a good artist. Seri takes this person for herself, because according to her, artists can draw maps, diagrams, and graphs, and this is a very useful skill. Hans and the others realize that this man will be absolutely useless to the elite search party. Then everyone starts searching the prisoners and 2 guys start getting nervous. Sari examines the girls and checks what they might have hidden under their clothes. Suddenly, Hans shoots two guys. Sari screams in horror and asks why Hans did this. Hans replies that these two were spies and wanted to harm everyone else later. Hans found weapons hidden under their clothes. Hans then orders that a staging post be made in the church, as they will be staying here that night. The next morning, members of Hans's squad examine the resources they discovered in the church during the previous night. Hans says that they have received very good supplies of food of various kinds, and the mission can be considered a success. Hans says they will take all these resources with them and distribute them to his camps. Then Hans sees that the head of the sect who was infected through the bite of the monster did not turn into a zombie, but simply died. Hans announces to everyone that the first case of immunity to the zombie virus has just been recorded. Hans says that from this day on, if someone is bitten by a zombie, they will be placed in a special quarantine and not killed immediately. Hans calls one of the guys from his search party to him. He talks to him one-on-one and asks about the situation that the girl from the northern camp told about. Namely that this guy allegedly tried to persuade her to have sex in exchange for food. The guy denies these false accusations and says that this is slander and he never did that. Hans wonders which of the two is lying. He understands that perhaps that girl from the northern camp deliberately deceived Sari and someone started an intrigue. Hans tries to understand who is doing this and why, and he understands that there is a hidden meaning in this situation. During the day, everyone is getting ready to move on. Hans tells all the captives that he recently heard an announcement on the radio that a girls' camp had formed near the train station. He tells the captives that they will escort them there, and from that moment on, the captives will live freely in this camp. Hans says that they have never met with representatives of this camp and now will be the first contact. The radio said that the girls in that camp could live peacefully and no one would touch them. The prisoners thank Hans for this decision, and for the fact that he saved their lives, and in addition, will accompany them to the new camp. Hans orders the team to begin moving out on a new mission to escort the prisoners. The janitor understands Hans's plan, namely that the main character will thus send the captives on reconnaissance for a possible trap. And if it is not a trap, then the captives will be able to live there, and Hans will not have to worry about them. Everyone moved towards the place that the girl had spoken about on the radio. The cleaner approaches Hans and starts a conversation with him. He praises Hans for his cool plan and Hans's good calculation. The main character tells him that the cleaner is not stupid either and understood everything, and that is why he trusts him. Everyone came to the appointed place. Hans gives one of the girls a flare and says that if this all turns out to be a trap, the girl should shoot into the air and Hans' squad will come to the rescue. The girl, on behalf of all the captives, personally thanks Hans for what he does for them. Hans commands everyone over the radio to take their places. Hans's search party splits into several groups and begins to check the surrounding area. Hans finds a closed door and is about to go inside. Behind the door, Hans discovers traces of human habitation and realizes that this is all a trap and they are surrounded. Hans is tense, but he understands that he has his best men and weapons with him, and they will be able to repel the enemy. Suddenly, Hans hears someone's footsteps and hides. With a sharp blow to the face, Hans knocks down a man walking past. Then Hans immediately starts shooting into the darkness as he notices several more silhouettes there. In response, they start shooting at Hans with a machine gun. Hans understands from the sound that at least two people were shooting at him. Hans takes aim and starts shooting at the enemy. He hits the first person and we see that it is a man in ammunition. Next, Hans shoots the second man, who is also wearing a bulletproof vest. Hans hides behind cover again. After waiting a few seconds, Hans examines the situation and realizes that there were only 3 attackers. Hans calls the second squad on the radio and orders them to report to him on the situation. Suddenly, Hans hears the sound of a motorcycle and sees a biker approaching him. Because of this, Hans shoots at the biker, but hits his helmet and body armor. Hans understands that the situation is not simple and his enemies have normal firearms. The biker swings a sharp axe at Hans. However, the main character manages to block the attack with his machine gun. Next, Hans takes out his favorite army knife. The main character attacks his enemy with a knife and pushes him aside. Hans takes a fighting stance and asks the enemy who he is. The man in the helmet says that he will ask the questions, not Hans. Turning back, Hans sees that Sari has been taken hostage and is being threatened with death. Hans and his group are in a very bad situation. Hans says that he doesn't need Sari, and they can take her for themselves, but in that case he will kill everyone. Sari is offended by Hans for such words, although in her head she understands that what he said is another of Hans's plans. The man in the helmet thinks that Hans is willing to risk everything just to kill them, and therefore needs to be careful. Suddenly, the cleaner calls Hans on the radio. He says that they just captured some old man who is the leader of the gang that surrounded them. The man in the helmet is completely surprised, and realizes that while Hans was buying time, his second squad surrounded their camp and won. Kanas announces that he has won this battle before it even begins and demands that they lay down their arms. The man holding Sari hostage says that they can't surrender just because the old man was captured. However, the second man throws off his helmet. He says that they surrender to Hans and ask not to kill the old man who is the head of their camp. Suddenly, Sari kicks the man in the red suit. The girl takes the gun from the man and tells him to apologize for the way he treated her. The man apologizes and understands that this girl is well trained and very strong, and that it is better not to joke with her. Hans praises Sari for her quick thinking and for fighting back. Sari remembers Hans's words about how he was willing to risk her life during the battle. Hans apologizes for such words and says that it was just a tactical move. Sari yells at him and says that if Hans does that again, she will kill him herself. Next, the prisoners are tied up and all weapons are taken away. Hans gets in touch on the radio and says that they will now come to the main detachment. Hans praises everyone for the work they did, and for the fact that everyone acted according to plan. We see that a new camp has been captured, which has ammunition and weapons, but we still don't understand whether these guys are good or bad. Hans understands that now he has to deal with them and understand whether they are enemies or not. Next, we are shown the leader of this camp, whom everyone calls the Old Man, and Hans asks him who they are, why they advertised on the radio station, and whether all of this is a trap for girls. However, the Old Man says that he will not say a single word about his camp and sends Hans. Hans gets furious and takes out his favorite army knife and says that now will be the Old Man's last chance to answer his questions. Suddenly, a familiar voice of a girl comes from the radio station, addressing the Old Man as her father. Hans realizes that this is the voice of his former colleague Jung-mi, and that she is the daughter of this Old Man. He takes the radio from the Old Man and is about to answer. Hans tells the radio station that he already misses Jung-mi's voice and greets her. We are shown standing in another room, Jung-mi, who recognizes Hans's voice, and is incredibly surprised to hear the one who saved her at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. Hans greets Jung-mi on the radio and is glad to hear her voice. The girl is completely confused, as she has not heard Hans's voice since he saved her life at the beginning of the apocalypse. The Old Man realizes that these two have known each other before and feels like a superfluous person. Hans radios Jung-mi to meet and discuss their next plan of action and how they will resolve the conflict. At the same time, the main character orders not to let anyone go and to keep an eye on all the soldiers. Jung-mi agrees to meet with Hans to talk. Hans tells the girl that she looks older and wiser than she did before, and he is surprised that she was able to survive. Jung-mi first of all thanks Hans for the advice he gave her at the beginning of the apocalypse, and it was thanks to him that she was able to survive. Jin appears in front of the girl, who says that he is protecting Hans, and if the girl is planning something bad, he will personally finish her off. The girl says that there is no trap in this area, and that in fact she founded a camp for girls. Jung-mi explains that the people with the guns with her are mercenaries, and the Old Man is their boss, and they are here to provide protection. Hans asks why these mercenaries attacked his squad first. The girl answers Hans that it was he who attacked her people first, and even killed 3 people, but no one caused him any harm. Hans realizes that he really did attack people first, and says that these were precautionary measures. Hans sees that just like at their first meeting, these people are real, well-equipped professionals, and he has no opportunity to think. Then the Old Man, Hans, and Jung-mi begin to talk together. The Old Man says that Hans killed 3 of his men and now he owes him a debt. The Old Man then goes on to tell how his mercenary squad became part of this women's camp. The Old Man says that he and his men provide protection to the women in exchange for cooking and other services, with everyone cooperating on a voluntary basis. Hans is surprised by this state of affairs, and did not expect that friendly relations between several groups of surviving people are currently possible. According to Hans, people are now divided into 2 types. You are either weak and subordinate to the strong, or strong and subordinate to the weak. The Old Man also added that the women's camp had done something else important for his detachment. Namely, the Old Man says that Jung-mi shared with them very important information, which Hans told the girl at the very beginning. Hans's advice about not gathering in groups of more than 20 people, as well as about the presence of a wave of zombies and the fact that there are mutated types of zombies in the world, turned out to be very true. According to the Old Man, by working together and helping each other, his unit, along with the Jung-mi women's camp, were able to survive in this chaos. Hans realizes that all this time, by giving a few pieces of advice at the very beginning, he indirectly saved several dozen more lives. However, the Old Man adds that despite the fact that Hans and Jung-mi are good friends, he will not forget about Hans's debt. The main character asks the Old Man how he wants to repay the debt, and whether he is going to kill 3 of Hans's men in return. Hans understands that if the Old Man wants revenge, he will have to liquidate his squad. With the elimination of the Old Man's detachment, the girls' camp will be left without protection, and this will create inconveniences. Hans's men ask him what to do with the captured mercenaries. Hans replies that he needs time to decide and answer the question. Hans goes off to inspect the women's camp and check if he is being deceived. Having entered the territory, Hans's squad clears it of zombies that came to the noise. The Old Man says that he is surprised by the combat training of Hans's detachment and jokes that he would gladly take several of his men. Then the Old Man turns his attention to the cleaner and remembers how he had just defeated his men. Namely, the cleaner threw a smoke grenade and while everyone was confused, jumped on the Old Man and took him hostage. At this time, Hans's sniper eliminated several mercenaries, and thus Hans defeated the Old Man. The leader of the mercenary squad understands that Hans and his squad are not a simple gang, but very trained and organized people. Jung-mi and Hans walk through the women's camp and we see that the women there love and respect this girl. Hans is surprised that after all this time, the once weak Jung-mi managed to create her own camp and survive. Hans asks why she created a camp specifically for women. To this, Chung-mi replies that she was inspired to create the camp by the events she experienced while surviving alone. Next, our characters go inside the building where Hans is shown all the furnishings and introduced to the people. Suddenly, Hans notices Victoria among the rescued women and recognizes her. In the future that Hans experienced, this girl was the lover of the leader of the Soul Survivors Squad and was a terrible killer. She was engaged in infiltrating the camps under the guise of a harmless girl, and then killing everyone. She also learned the necessary information inside other camps and passed it on to the head of the Soul Survivor Squad, whose name was Negan. Hans realizes that he has another chance to weaken Negan by killing this ugly woman. By this time, according to Hans's calculations, she had already managed to kill about 40 people and now deserves punishment. Hans realizes that he needs to stay in this camp longer, as this is a great opportunity to eliminate this girl and finish off the Soul Survivors altogether. For now, for everyone around her, this girl is just a simple saved woman, and Hans decides not to tell anyone anything. Chung-mi and the old man ask Hans what he will do next. Hans thinks that he needs to stay in this camp because Negan might come here with his squad of bastards. He understands that he cannot leave these people because if he leaves, they will all be dead. Hans considers his plan of action and states that he is ready to consider options for cooperation. Chung-mi is glad to hear this and offers to discuss all the details. Hans then says that he wants to talk to the old man alone. When the two go into a private room, Hans says that he has a very interesting proposal for the mercenaries. The old man is very surprised by Hans's words, since he killed 3 of his men and is now trying to set his own terms. Hans says that there is a danger in this world that is much more serious than his squad and zombies. The old man listens to Hans's words and becomes interested. Hans tells the old man that in the city of Seoul there is a squad of bastards led by Negan, and very soon they will attack everyone who is here and kill everyone in the most brutal way. The old man